The rich widow had already chased away every trained nurse money could buy, and the broke dock worker who knocked on her door that morning was supposed to be the easiest one to break. But he was the only man who would stand in that room, take the sting of her words, and uncover the guilt she had buried deeper than all her silver and all her silk. Stay with me, because before this first day is over, she will test him in a way that would have exposed most people in minutes. By then, the story around Constance Marrow had become a kind of warning passed from one porch to another, from one clinic desk to the next. She lived in a grand old house above the harbor, a place with wide windows, polished banisters, and the sad hush of somewhere expensive that had forgotten how to feel warm. Her late husband had built a shipping fortune, and after he died, all that money stayed behind with her, and so did her temper. Nurses came because the pay was double what anyone else offered. They left because no amount of money could make a person stand there while a crystal tumbler flew past their ear, or while a woman flat on fine linen sliced into their pride with one sentence after another. One agency sent 3 people in a single week. The last one came down the front steps, pale as paper, clutching her handbag to her chest, and told the driver, "I'd rather scrub fish crates in winter." After that, even the agencies stopped answering the housekeeper's calls. That was the house Silas Reyes walked into. He had come looking for money. A few months earlier, the cannery by the harbor had shut down, and when it did, it took half the steady work in town with it. Silas had spent years on the docks, hands split by rope burn, shoulders hardened by wet crates and cold mornings. He knew the smell of salt soaked into old timber, diesel on the tide, gulls screaming over bait buckets. What he did not know was how to keep paying for his mother's care now that the jobs had dried up. She had been getting weaker by the month. Her medicine cost more than he liked to admit, and the woman who checked on her twice a week had quietly warned him that she would soon need more help than a son could manage alone. So when he heard that a bedridden widow in the big house above the harbor was paying twice the usual rate for a live-out caregiver, he did what desperate people do. He borrowed a clean shirt, brushed his coat, and knocked. The woman who opened the side door introduced herself as Nora Bell. She had the tired, quick eyes of someone who had spent too long putting out fires in a house where nothing ever fully cooled. She looked Silas up and down once, taking in the scuffed boots, the cheap coat, the broad hands, and then let out a breath through her nose. "You're here for her," she said. "For the position," he answered. Nora stepped aside, but only halfway. "Listen to me first. She needs everything: meals, washing, turning, medicine on schedule, breathing exercises when she'll allow them. Most days she won't. Some days she won't even let you finish a sentence." Her voice dropped lower. "She studies people. Friday, finds the sore spot. Then she presses till they crack." Silas nodded, but his eyes had drifted beyond her shoulder, past the narrow service hall with its waxed floor and umbrella stand, toward the deeper dark of the house. There was a smell in there that didn't belong in such a fine place. Not dirt, not neglect exactly. Closed air, medicine, old flowers past their best, windows that had not been opened enough. Nora noticed him noticing. "You still want to go in?" "My mother needs care," he said simply. "That means I need work." Something in that answer softened her for half a second. "You won't be the first to say that." "I don't need to be the first." Before she could reply, a sharp clatter rang from upstairs, like porcelain striking wood and bouncing once. Then came a woman's voice, thin from distance, but hard enough to stop both of them cold. "If that's another nurse, send him home. I'm not collecting cowards today." Nora closed her eyes for one beat, as if asking heaven for patience and not expecting an answer. Then she let him up. Constance Marrow was propped high in a mechanized bed near the far window of a room bigger than Silas's whole flat. A wool blanket lay smooth over her legs. A silver tray sat untouched at her side. Her hair had been brushed carefully. Her face still carried the shape of a woman who had once walked into rooms and watched them change around her. And her eyes were all edge. Cold blue, sharp as chipped glass. She looked furious at being seen. That gaze dropped to his hands first. "Well," she said, "they sent me the harbor itself." Silas stood still. Constance's lip curled. Calloused hands. Bargain coat. You smell like rope and cold wind. Are they trying to care for me or frighten me into recovery? Nora said you needed help, he replied. I need competence, she snapped. Help is what people offer when they want to feel good about themselves. Nora quietly began to explain the morning routine, but Constance cut across her without looking away from him. Don't bother, he'll be gone by supper. They always are. Her eyes narrowed a little more. Though I will admit, this one looks honest enough to steal only if he's hungry. Silas felt the heat rise in his neck, but he did not move. And that was the moment something small changed in the room, because she had expected a flinch, or anger, or a muttered excuse. Instead, the Penniless Dockhand just met her stare, rough hands at his sides, while somewhere beyond the glass the harbor bell sounded once through the fog. If you want to keep following this story, take a second to subscribe and stay with me. Then Constance tilted her head the tiniest bit and said, almost lazily, Fine, come closer. Let's find out what kind of poor man you really are. Silas stepped closer because there was nothing else to do. Up near the bed, the room felt even stranger than it had from the doorway. Everything was costly. The lamp base was brass, the curtains were heavy enough to block a storm, the coverlet had that smooth, cool look of fabric chosen by someone who never needed to ask the price. And still the place felt airless. Medicine sat sharp in the nose. A bowl of untouched pears had gone faintly sweet. There was lavender somewhere, but it had lost the fight. Constance watched him take it all in and seemed offended that he did not look impressed. Nora began with practical things. She showed him the rolling table, the glass straws, the folded cloths, the small bell Constance never used because she preferred shouting. She pointed to the tray of tablets arranged by hour, to the salves in labeled jars, to the sheet where turning times had been marked in neat blue ink. Breakfast first, Nora said quietly, then washing, then the morning medicines. Later, assisted movement if she allows it. If, Constance repeated, her voice dry as paper. That word does too much work in this house. Silas nodded once. Tell me what you need done first. Constance gave a short laugh that held no warmth at all. Listen to him, a man in a bargain coat, speaking as if he belongs in a room with monogrammed linen. Nora winced. Silas didn't answer. He moved toward the tray, and Constance's eyes followed every inch of him, alert and suspicious. When he lifted the teapot, she said the tea was already ruined. When he adjusted the pillow, she said his hands were too rough. When he asked whether the porridge should be thinned, she told him people with real training knew that without asking. He bore it in silence long enough that the clock on the mantel ticked through nearly 10 full minutes before she suddenly snapped. Well, have you left your tongue downstairs? No, he said. Then use it. You want breakfast while it's still warm. For the first time, she paused. Only for a second, but Nora noticed too. The feeding itself should have been simple. It was not. The spoon was too full, then too little. The napkin was too high, then crooked, then insulting. At one point, Constance turned her face away like an angry child, staring out toward the pale strip of harbor visible between the curtains. A gull cried somewhere beyond the glass, and Silas caught that tiny shift in her eyes, a flicker at a familiar sound. He filed it away and said nothing. After breakfast came the bath. Nora stayed for the transfer because even a strong man new to the work could make a mistake if he rushed. Between them, they moved her with careful straps and practiced steps from bed to bathing chair. Constance hated every second of it. The tiled washroom gleamed in white and gray, clean enough to echo. The water steamed. Soap opened in the damp air, fresh and sharp. And from the moment Silas tested the first cloth against her wrist, she began. Too cold, he warmed it. Now too hot, he changed it again. You're pulling at my shoulder. He eased his grip. Don't hover over me. He stepped half a pace back. Why are you so slow? Because he was trying not to hurt her, but he did not say that. The whole thing stretched and stretched until time itself seemed to thicken in that bright washroom. What should have taken 20 minutes took more than an hour. His shirt clung damp at the back. His forearms ached from holding, lifting, steadying. Nora passed fresh towels without speaking. She had seen storms before, and through all of it, Constance kept aiming her words where she thought they would land deepest. "Did they truly close the cannery?" she asked at one point, "or did they simply get tired of looking at you?" Silas wrung water from the cloth into the basin. "The cannery closed." "Such certainty." "The gates are chained. That makes it easy to confirm." Her eyes flashed, because that had not been submission. It had been simple fact, and somehow that irritated her more. By the time he had her settled back in bed, her hair brushed and her blanket pulled smooth, the morning light had shifted across the floorboards. Nora touched Silas lightly at the elbow and murmured that he should wash up in the small sink by the wardrobe. He did, scrubbing soap from his wrists, cooling his face, listening to the faint scrape of sheets behind him and the far-off boom of harbor machinery below the cliffs. When he turned back, Constance had closed her eyes. Nora gathered the damp towels. "I'll fetch the next medicine tray," she said, and for a moment the two of them were alone. Silas crossed the room slowly, meaning only to check whether she was truly resting or simply done speaking. That was when he saw it. 3 banknotes lay half under the edge of the bedside book, too neatly placed to be accidental. Not dropped, not forgotten. Set there where any tired, desperate man would notice them the instant he came near. The top note was crisp, the corner lifted in the weak draft from the old vent. Constance's breathing stayed measured, almost theatrical in its calm. Silas looked at the money, then at her closed face, and just as he reached toward the bedside table, her fingers did not move, her eyelids did not open, but the faintest change touched her mouth, as if the bedridden widow were already waiting to see what kind of poor man had finally entered her room. He saw the trap for what it was almost at once. The notes were not tucked away with bills or left fallen near the rug. They had been placed where a tired man would notice them, and where a watchful woman could later decide what kind of soul he had. Silas picked them up without hurry. The paper felt crisp and dry against fingers more used to wet rope and splintered crate wood. He slid open the bedside ledger, set the money inside between 2 blank pages, and closed it softly so the corners would not crease. Then he pulled the small writing table closer, straightened the water glass, and went on preparing the next medicine as if nothing unusual had happened. Only then did Constance open her eyes. "You're either very honest," she said, staring at the ceiling, "or very clever." Silas measured liquid into a spoon. "You left money where it could be lost." "Lost?" A faint edge sharpened her voice. "Is that what poor men call temptation now?" "It's what I call something that didn't belong on the edge of a table." He brought the spoon to her lips. She took the medicine, still studying him, and there was something new in that look. Not trust, not even close. But her contempt had been interrupted, and in a house like that, interruption mattered. Nora came back just then with fresh linen and paused when she sensed the room had shifted. She looked from Constance to Silas to the closed ledger, but she was too practiced to ask questions in front of her employer. The rest of the afternoon dragged with its own kind of weather. Soup warmed and cooled on the tray. Silverware clicked softly against china. The house creaked now and then, as if settling under years of silence. Silas helped with another turn in bed, changed the pillow slip when a little tea spilled near the seam, and checked the medicine times against the clock. Constance found fresh ways to cut at him. She asked whether all dockmen smelled of fish when they were nervous. She asked if he had borrowed that coat from a dead uncle. She asked whether his mother knew her son had traded one kind of labor for another. Each question was meant to sting. Each one landed, at least a little. You could see it in the slight tightening of his jaw, in the way his shoulders squared once and then released. But he never threw a word back at her. Late in the day, when Nora stepped out to speak with the cook, Constance said, "You should understand something. Silence is not dignity if it comes from slowness." Silas folded a blanket at the foot of the bed. "Maybe." She turned her head just enough to look at him fully. So you admit that's what this is? You haven't found a decent answer yet? He met her eyes. No, I just don't think every insult needs one. The room went very still after that. Even the faint tick of the mantel clock seemed louder. Outside, a cart rattled over the stones down by the lower road. Somewhere in the house, a door opened and closed. Constance watched him for so long that Nora, coming back in, hesitated at the threshold. The old housekeeper had seen people lose their jobs in that room for much less. Instead, Constance said, "Bring the curtain back 2 inches. The light's in my eyes." He did. That evening, Nora found him in the pantry, rinsing out a cup under warm water. The kitchen smelled of yeast, roasted onions, and coal heat from the range. It was the first place in the house that felt lived in. Copper pans hung above the table. Someone had left a loaf cooling under a cloth. Nora handed him a plate with a thick slice of bread and a wedge of cheese, then leaned one hip against the counter and lowered her voice. "She tested you," I noticed. "She always does, usually sooner if she thinks the person is desperate." Nora studied him the way a person looks at a bridge plank before stepping on it. Most don't pass the easy test. Silas chewed, swallowed, and washed it down with water from a blue enamel cup. "That was the easy one?" Nora gave a tired little smile. "Money tells her whether you're greedy. It tells her nothing about whether you'll stay." A gust pushed against the kitchen window. The glass trembled faintly in its frame. Silas looked toward the dark beyond it, where the harbor lights would be burning in scattered yellow rows, and thought of his mother, alone in the small flat, likely already asleep in her chair. He could almost smell the liniment she used on her wrists. He rubbed his own hands together, feeling the rawness left by hot water and lifting straps. "Why does she do it?" he asked. "The testing, the way she talks." Nora was quiet for a moment. She took the cup from his hand, set it upside down to dry, and said, "Because if she can prove people false quickly enough, she never has to wonder what they meant to do later." That sat between them heavier than either the bread or the silence. When he returned upstairs with the evening tray, the room was dimmer. The last of the light had thinned to gray along the window glass. A lamp glowed near the bed, turning the brass warm and the shadows deep. Constance looked half asleep again, but this time the performance, if it was one, had changed. Her breathing was slower. Her face seemed more tired than hard. Silas checked the chart, lifted the cup, and noticed something else on the blanket near her hand. Not money. A chain. Gold, worn soft by years of touch. And hanging from it, just visible against the pale fabric, was an old pocket watch with a scratched cover and salt-darkened hinges, placed where it could not possibly have ended up by accident. The watch changed the room. Money was one thing. Money was cold, replaceable, easy to put back in a ledger and forget. This was different. Even from where he stood, Silas could see the wear on the gold case, the tiny dents along the rim, the chain links polished smooth by a thumb that must have worried them for years. It was the kind of object people touched when they were thinking or grieving or waiting. It lay against the blanket near Constance's hand like bait set with care. He did not reach for it right away. Instead, he set down the medicine cup, checked the edge of the blanket where it had folded under her shoulder, and only then leaned in. The metal was cool when he lifted it. He turned it just enough to catch the lamplight, and on the back he saw a set of engraved initials, softened by time but still legible. E.M. The hinge gave a tiny click when his thumb brushed it, though he did not open it. He looked at her face. Her eyes were closed again, but there was too much attention in the stillness. "Where would you like this kept?" he asked. Nothing. Silas waited another beat. It could slip off the blanket in the night. Her eyelids lifted at last, blue, sharp, awake. "So," she said softly, "you found his watch." The way she said his told Silas more than the initials had. He held it with both hands, careful, respectful in a plain way that had no performance in it. "It shouldn't be out where it can fall." "Perhaps I wanted it there." "Then tell me where you want it after." She stared at him for a long moment. A carriage rolled somewhere below on the road, muffled through the walls. The lamp flame shifted behind its shade. At last she said, "Open the top drawer." Inside the drawer were neatly stacked handkerchiefs, a silver-backed brush, and a shallow leather tray lined in dark blue velvet. Silas laid the watch there, closing the chain so it would not catch. When he shut the drawer again, very gently, Constance's face had changed. The contempt was still there, but something else had slid in beside it. Frustration, maybe. As if he had answered the test the wrong way by answering it too well. "My husband hated lateness," she said suddenly. Silas glanced back at her. "Did he?" "He timed everything. Departures, meetings, weather reports, even tea." Her mouth hardened. He believed clocks were a way to bully life into order. There were a dozen ways Silas could have answered that. He chose none of them. He only asked, "Do you want the window latch tighter for the night?" The question seemed to annoy her more than any argument could have. "Why do you keep doing that?" "Doing what?" "Moving on." He looked at the brass latch, then at her again. "Because you asked where the watch should go. I put it there." A small sound escaped her, almost a scoff, almost something else. "You are an infuriating man. I've been called worse." "I can imagine." When Nora returned to settle the last things for the evening, she found Constance unusually quiet and Silas adjusting the screen near the fire so the heat would drift more evenly toward the bed. The housekeeper's eyes flicked to the drawer, then to Constance's face. Again, she asked nothing. In that house, people survived by learning which silences to leave untouched. Nora did, however, pull Silas aside in the corridor once the bedroom door was nearly closed. The hallway smelled faintly of beeswax and old wallpaper paste, and a runner muffled their footsteps. Somewhere downstairs, crockery clinked as the kitchen was being set in order for the night. "What happened?" she whispered. "He found another thing to test," Silas said. Nora frowned. "Another?" "The watch." For the first time since he had arrived, real alarm crossed her face. "You touched it?" "She told me where to put it." Nora exhaled slowly, one hand going to her chest. "Then she meant for you to find it. She never leaves that out. Never." Her voice dropped even further. "That was his. She keeps it close, always." If anyone had treated it carelessly, Silas finished the thought in his own mind. He had already seen enough of Constance to know the answer. There would have been no second chance. Nora studied him in the dim light from the wall sconce. "And you didn't open it?" "No." "Most people would have. Most people aren't standing in her room trying to keep their job." That earned the briefest twitch at the corner of Nora's mouth. "You still think this place is about the job?" Silas leaned his shoulder once against the wall, feeling the ache from the long day settle deep into his back. Right now, yes. But as he said it, he was not fully sure. There had been something in Constance's voice when she spoke about the watch. A crack so small most people would miss it. Not softness, not yet. Just a place where memory had come too near the surface. Before he left for the night, Nora walked him back into the room for the final check. Constance wanted the lamp lowered, then raised, then shifted 2 inches to the left. She complained that the blanket felt heavy, then said it was too loose after he adjusted it. She dismissed Nora with a flick of her eyes and addressed only Silas. "You may come back in the morning," she said, as if granting him a very narrow privilege. "If you still find this profitable, I'll be here. We'll see." He turned toward the door. His hand had just touched the knob when her voice stopped him again, thinner now, but somehow more dangerous. "One more thing," she said. Silas looked back. Constance was watching him with that same bright, measuring stare. "Tomorrow, I want you to bring me breakfast yourself. And before you do, open the drawer and wind the watch." Silas thought about the watch all the way home and all the way back again. Before dawn, the harbor road was still wet from the night mist, and the air carried that sharp mix of salt, tar, and cold iron that never quite leaves a working chore. He stopped first at his mother's flat, lit the stove for her, set out her tablets, and listened while she tried to pretend she had slept better than she had. Her cough told the truth for her. By the time he climbed the hill to the Marrow House, the eastern sky had gone pale, and the windows of that place looked like shut eyes refusing morning. Nora let him in through the side door with a look that said she'd been waiting to see whether he would actually return. "You're early," she murmured. "So is she, I suppose." She barely slept. Nora handed him a fresh apron and lowered her voice. And yes, she mentioned the watch before anything else. When he entered the room, Constance was already awake, propped against the pillows, her expression cool and guarded. The tray with breakfast things had not yet arrived, but the drawer she had named the night before seemed to pull at the whole room. Silas crossed to it without flourish, opened it, and lifted the watch from its velvet tray. This time, he did have to touch the crown. The metal resisted at first, then turned with tiny measured clicks under his fingers. He counted them the way a working man counts anything that matters. Enough tension, no forcing. When he laid it back down, he closed the drawer and said, "It's wound." Constance watched him closely. "You didn't open it." "You asked me to wind it." That wasn't an answer. He met her stare. "Then yes, I didn't." She let the silence sit. The faint ticking from inside the drawer had begun again, so soft you had to want to hear it. Nora came in with the tray just then, and even she seemed to notice that new sound. Warm oats, weak tea, sliced pear, medicine cup. Morning had entered the room, but only halfway. Breakfast went badly on purpose. Constance found fault with the spoon, the tray angle, the thickness of the porridge, the temperature of the tea, and the fact that Silas folded the napkin in thirds instead of halves. When Nora suggested the room might feel better with the curtains opened another hand's width, Constance said the daylight was vulgar. When Silas moved the tray closer so she would not strain her neck, she told him he had the bedside manners of a crate loader. That one was aimed with precision. Nora kept her eyes on the medicine chart. Silas only said, "I probably do." That answer irritated her more than protest would have. After breakfast, he did something no one had asked him to do. He crossed to the tall window beside the fireplace and unlatched it an inch. Cold sea air slipped in at once, carrying gull cries, the far thud of rigging, and the low horn of a vessel out beyond the breakwater. The curtains stirred. Freshness cut through the stale lavender and medicine smell that had settled into every fabric in the room. Constance's head turned sharply. "Close that. It's stuffy in here. I'm not interested in your opinion of my air." Silas left the window where it was. "You can smell the rain coming in." That made her blink. "There is no rain." He stood still for a second, listening. Another horn, lower this time. "Not yet." Nora, who had been arranging folded linen at the wardrobe, glanced over. "You can tell from that?" "From the foghorn and the pressure." He tapped the side of the window frame lightly. "And the gulls are flying inland." Constance stared at him with open disbelief, then annoyance, then something harder to place. "You sound very pleased with your fishing wisdom." "It's dock wisdom," he said. "Different trade." "Oh, forgive me. I would hate to insult the hierarchy of men who smell like nets." But she did not make him close the window. The morning care went on. He shaved her carefully where she asked, changed the pillowcases, rubbed warmth back into her hands after the washcloth cooled them, and kept every movement steady, even when she made a point of finding the sorest words she could. Once, as he adjusted the blanket near her feet, she said, "You must have imagined this kind of room when you were young. Is that why you're so calm in it now?" Silas tucked the edge of the blanket under her ankle. "No." "No dream of climbing above your station?" "I was usually too tired for dreaming before bed." That answer landed somewhere she had not expected. Her mouth tightened, but she had no quick reply ready, and that itself was unusual enough to quiet the room for a moment. Around midday, Nora brought in a small stack of letters and a newspaper folded to the shipping page. "These were delivered this morning," she said. "Should I leave them in the study?" Constance's face changed almost too quickly to catch. "No," Nora paused. "No? Leave them here." The housekeeper did as told, setting the letters on the side table. Their edges were damp from the mist outside. One envelope bore the blue seal of a harbor office. Another was hand-addressed in cramped ink. Silas noticed them only in passing, but Constance noticed him noticing, and her eyes narrowed again as if she regretted allowing the papers into the room at all. He reached for the newspaper to straighten it, and she snapped, "Don't touch that!" He withdrew his hand at once. "All right." A long minute passed. The horn sounded again from offshore. The open window let in a ribbon of colder air that moved the top envelope just enough for its corner to tap against the polished table. Then Constance spoke, with that same dangerous control from the night before. "If I asked you to read the shipping notices to me," she said, "would you mispronounce every vessel in the column? Or only the expensive ones?" The question hung in the room with the faint ticking from the drawer. Silas looked at the folded paper, then at her. "I can read them." Constance gave the slightest lift of one brow. "That was not the point." "I know." Nora, still near the wardrobe, had gone quiet again. She understood what was happening. This was another measure, just dressed in better clothes. If he stumbled over the names, he would confirm what Constance wanted to believe about him. If he read too boldly, she would call it presumption. The only path through was to do the simple thing well and let her be angry if she chose. Silas picked up the newspaper. The pages smelled faintly of wet ink and harbor damp. He unfolded to the shipping column, the paper crackling in the stillness. "Inbound freighter Maribel delayed by fog off the outer channel," he read. "Trawler St. Agnes requesting engine parts before evening tide. Coastal packet Lorne making berth change due to crosswind." His voice was steady, plain, used to speaking over work noise rather than in fine rooms. Constance watched him with a sharp, almost annoyed attention. Twice she tried to cut in with a correction, and twice he had already spoken the name properly. On the third item she snapped, "Not Lauren, Lorne, one syllable." He glanced at the line again. "That's what I said." Nora bit the inside of her cheek to stop a reaction. Constance heard it anyway and shot her a look. Then she turned back to Silas. "Continue." So he did. Harbor dues, a notice about a damaged buoy, a brief item on a vessel expected late because of rough water farther up the coast. When he reached a narrow paragraph on an older cargo steamer changing registry, Constance stopped him. "Read that again." He did. Slower. He read it again, and this time she closed her eyes, listening as if she could see the ship itself, its tonnage, its age, the line of its hull. When he finished, her fingers gave the tiniest, restless shift against the blanket. Just memory passing through her body. "You know more of that world than your coat suggests," she said at last. Silas folded the paper once along its old crease. "I know what I've worked around." "That is still more than most men with offices know," she muttered. It was closer to irritation at being forced to acknowledge competence where she had expected none. Nora heard it too. She brought the medicine cup at the exact right moment, letting the pause stand without naming it. Constance took the tablets with a little grimace, then nodded toward the side table where the letters still waited. "The one with the blue seal," she said. Silas handed it to Nora, who broke it open carefully and drew out a single, stiff sheet. Her eyes moved across the page. "Harbor Insurance Board," she said. "They're asking for signatures on suspended widow claims." Constance's face cooled at once. "Set it aside." "There are 4 files attached," Nora added softly. "Then set all of it aside." Silas said nothing, but he noticed the way her jaw tightened. These were not ordinary household papers. The harbor mattered to her too much for that. Yet she wanted the letter out of sight, out of hand, away from whatever feeling it stirred. He put the newspaper down beside the unopened mail and moved to straighten the tray, giving her the privacy of silence without stepping out of the room. A little later, when Nora left to fetch fresh linens from downstairs, Constance spoke again, her voice lower now. "What did you do before the cannery?" Silas looked up from rinsing the teaspoon in the basin. The water had gone warm from the pitcher, carrying a faint tin smell from the jug. Different jobs: loading, rope work, net repair when they needed extra hands, small engine checks if someone was short. "You repair engines?" "A bit." "You read the shipping page?" "Yes." "You can smell rain before it comes?" "Sometimes." Her eyes narrowed. "And yet here you are helping me swallow tablets. That's where the work is." She stared at him as though the answer irritated her by being too plain to attack. "You could have lied, you know." "About what?" "About ambition. Men usually prefer it." Silas dried the spoon with a clean cloth. "I don't mind work." "That is not ambition." "No," he said. "It's rent." For a moment, something like a laugh threatened the corner of her mouth and disappeared before it fully formed. It was gone so quickly that if Nora had been present, she might have missed it. But Silas saw it. So did Constance, and that seemed to anger her all over again. "Don't look pleased with yourself," she said sharply. "You have not charmed me. You have only managed not to be stupid for an entire morning." "I'll try to keep the streak alive." That one slipped out before he could stop it. The silence that followed was different from the others. Nora re-entered, carrying the linens, and slowed, sensing the air in the room had shifted again. Constance was staring at Silas with parted lips, caught off guard. No one in this house answered her that way. Not insolently, not timidly. Just like a man speaking to another human being. Outside, the wind pressed harder against the partly open window. A gull struck one sharp cry and vanished. The topmost letter on the side table slid a fraction in the draft, exposing another envelope beneath it, older than the others, yellowed at the edges, addressed in a hand unlike the rest. Constance saw Silas's eyes flick toward it and said at once, too quickly, "Don't touch that." He held still. Nora did too. Then Constance swallowed, looked away toward the gray strip of water beyond the glass, and said, in a voice that had lost some of its steel, "Read the Harbor Board letter again. Every word this time." Silas took the sheet from Nora and read exactly as he was told. The paper was stiffer than the newspaper, official in that joyless way only office paper can be. He held it near the lamp and began. The Harbor Insurance Board was notifying Mrs. Constance Merrow that 4 pending support claims filed by widows of lost crewmen remained suspended. Further review was required. Missing authorizations from the old Mariners Relief account had delayed payment. Supplemental signatures, account verification, and updated beneficiary review were requested within 14 days. There were names attached, real names: Mrs. Della Haynes, Mrs. Ruth Fenn, Mrs. Martha Kells, Mrs. June Talbot, women waiting on decisions made in rooms like this one. By the second name, Constance's face had gone flat. "Enough," she said. "There's another page." "I said enough." Nora reached for the letter, but Silas did not move until Constance looked directly at him. Her eyes had lost their sharp mockery for a moment. What showed there instead was harder to face. Weariness, buried under pride so long it had learned to speak like anger. "Put it away," she said again, quieter now. He folded the pages along their old crease and set them back on the table. The open window let in a colder drift of air, enough to stir the edge of the envelope. Somewhere below, chains knocked against a mast in uneven rhythm. Constance turned her head toward the sound, and for one strange beat, she did not seem like a woman ruling a room. She seemed like someone listening for news she had once lived by. The rest of the hour moved with that same strained quiet. Nora changed the linens. Silas checked the next medicine time, warmed a towel for Constance's hands, and reset the pillows so the pressure under her shoulders eased. She did not thank him. She did not insult him either, and in that house, the absence of cruelty almost counted as speech. It did not last. When Nora stepped out to speak to the cook, Constance's voice returned with fresh edge. "Do you imagine yourself useful now?" Silas was rinsing the medicine glass at the basin. "I'm doing the work." That is not what I asked. She kept her eyes on the ceiling. Men like you always mistake being present for being important. He dried the glass with a clean cloth. I didn't say I was important. No, you've chosen the holier posture, quiet endurance. Her mouth twisted faintly. Very effective. It makes kind women want to defend you. Silas set the glass down. Nora doesn't need instructions from me. Constance turned her face enough to look at him. And you think I don't see it? The careful tone, the plain answers, the rough hands behaving more gently than I expected. You want to be judged differently. He thought about lying. It would have been easier. Instead, he said, everybody does. That answer landed deeper than she wanted. For a few seconds, the ticking from the drawer seemed louder than both of them. Constance broke the silence first. Bring me the smaller shawl. He crossed to the cedar chest at the foot of the bed and lifted the lid. A dry scent rose at once. Wool, old lavender, and something salt-faded beneath it. Inside, the shawls were stacked with almost military neatness. Beside them sat a narrow wooden case, a leather ledger, and a bundle of envelopes tied with green ribbon. Silas only took the shawl, soft gray with a darker border, and closed the lid. When he laid it over her shoulders, Constance watched his face very closely, checking whether curiosity had gotten the better of him. It hadn't. You're either disciplined, she said, or unimaginative. I've been called worse than both. That almost smile touched her again and vanished. This time he was sure he had seen it. By afternoon, Nora asked if he wanted her to handle the assisted movement routine, since it was his first full day with that part of the care. Before he could answer, Constance did it for him. No, she said. Let him try. Since he has survived paper and breakfast, we may as well discover whether he can count to 10. The exercises were done in bed, with rolled towels, careful lifts, guided stretches, and timed breathing. Nora explained the sequence once, quietly. Ankles first, knees, shoulders, hands, slow rotations, steady rhythm. Silas listened the way a working man listens when a mistake matters. He checked each movement with his eyes before he touched her. Constance complained through the first 2 stretches, accused him of being too stiff on the 3rd, too cautious on the 4th, and absurdly slow on the 5th. But when he adjusted the support under her wrist exactly the way Nora had shown him, some strain left her face in spite of herself. Again, Nora said softly. Silas repeated the motion. Constance stared at the canopy over the bed. Who taught you to follow instructions? Men who got hurt when people didn't. That shut the room down for a moment. A little later, when Nora was writing down the completed exercises, Silas noticed that Constance's breathing had gone shallow, something closer to retreat. Her eyes had drifted past him to the window, to the line of pale water beyond it, to something much farther away than the harbor. The same look had crossed her face when he read those names aloud. He took a chance. Do those claims belong to families you know? He asked. Nora's pencil stopped moving. Constance's gaze snapped back to him so fast it was almost a strike. You have grown bold. I asked a question. You are not here to ask questions. No, he said evenly, but you asked me to read the letter. Her nostrils flared. The shawl rose and fell once with the force of her breath. For a second, it looked as though something sharp and punishing would come out of her next. Instead, she looked toward the side table, toward the folded board notice and the older yellowed envelope beneath it, and said in a voice stripped of all ornament, Tomorrow, you will read the other one. The promise of that letter sat in the room through the rest of the afternoon like a storm no one named out loud. Constance said almost nothing after that. She let Nora finish the charting. She let Silas settle the shawl again when it slipped from one shoulder. She even let the window stay cracked, though every now and then the sea wind lifted a strand of her hair and seemed to irritate her on principle. But her eyes kept drifting back to the yellowed envelope on the side table. It was older than the others, the paper gone soft at the corners, the flap sealed long ago and then opened with care. Somebody had handled it many times. Somebody had not been able to throw it away. When evening came and Silas prepared to leave, Constance did not dismiss him with her usual sharpness. She only said, "Tomorrow means tomorrow, not late. I'll be here." "I am aware that poor men value employment," she replied, but the line had lost some of its poison. That night he slept badly. The watch, the widow claims, the old envelope, they all kept circling in his head. Before sunrise, he was back at the house, hands cold from the climb, coat smelling faintly of harbor fog. Nora opened the side door before he knocked twice. "She's been awake since before dawn," the housekeeper whispered, "and don't ask me what mood." I gave up trying to name those years ago. Constance was sitting higher in the bed than usual when he entered, the pillows stacked precisely, the breakfast untouched. The yellowed letter already lay on the blanket near her right hand, offered, though in her way nothing was ever simply offered. "Read it," she said. Silas picked it up carefully. The paper crackled like dry leaves. The ink inside had faded to brown. It was not official, no seal, no typed header. A human hand, uneven but earnest. He began. "Mrs. Marrow, I hope you will forgive my boldness in writing again. Since my husband Owen was taken in the winter squall, the grocer has extended credit twice and says he cannot do it a third time. My oldest boy has left school to mend nets for cash, though he is only 14. You once told us your society would not leave seamen's families behind if the worst happened. I know you have suffered a loss of your own, and I would not trouble you if I had another place to turn." Silas stopped for half a breath because Constance had closed her eyes. "Continue," she said. "The rent is due by the end of the month. If there is any small relief left in the account, I ask it not for myself but for the children, who still believe promises made by important people must mean something. Respectfully, Eliza Dane." The room went silent except for the whisper of the window draft and the faint ticking from the drawer. Nora had gone still by the wardrobe, one hand pressed flat over the folded linen she carried. Silas looked up. Constance's face had changed in a way he had not yet seen. She looked older suddenly, exposed, as if the skin itself could no longer hold all the strain beneath it. "When was it written?" he asked quietly. Nora answered because Constance did not. "About 1.5 years ago." Silas glanced at the envelope again. "Was she answered?" Constance opened her eyes. "No." The single word came out bare and flat. No excuse around it, no anger, just fact. Silas laid the letter back on the blanket. "Why keep it?" That brought some life back into her expression, though it came in the form of resistance. "You are growing tiresome." "Maybe," he said, "but you kept it." She looked toward the window, where the morning light had turned the harbor into a pale sheet of hammered silver. "Because some things deserve to accuse you properly." Nora lowered her gaze. Silas felt that line land in the room and stay there. He could have pushed harder. A different man might have. Instead, he moved the breakfast tray closer and said, "The oats are getting cold." Constance let out a breath that might once have become laughter in another life. "You are impossible to steer." "I've been told." She ate little. 2 spoons of oats, a sip of tea, half a pear slice. When it came time for the morning stretches, she endured the first 2 movements, then pulled back as much as she was able. It was not much in the body, but it was enough in the eyes. "No more," she said. Nora hesitated. "You know what the doctor said." "I said no more." Silas set the rolled towel aside. "All right." That got her attention at once. "All right?" "You don't want the exercises right now." "I know what I said." He adjusted the blanket over her knees. "Then what do you want?" For the first time since he had entered the house, Constance seemed to have no answer ready. She stared at him as if the question itself were some kind of trick. Most people in that room, Silas had already learned, either argued with her or obeyed her. Very few asked what she actually wanted once she refused something. Nora watched too, careful not to break the moment. Constance's gaze slid past them both, beyond the lamp, beyond the curtains, toward the glass doors at the far side of the room that opened onto the enclosed veranda overlooking the water. Dust had gathered in the lower corners of those panes. One chair out there sat draped with a cover no one had bothered to remove. "I used to sit there," she said at last, so softly that both of them almost missed it. "On the veranda?" Silas asked. "Yes." Nora blinked. "Mrs. Marrow, you haven't wanted to go out there in months." Constance's mouth tightened, as if she regretted saying it already. "I know exactly how long it has been." Silas followed her line of sight to the glass doors, to the pale band of sea beyond them, to the place she had apparently been avoiding without ever naming it. Then he looked back at her and said, "If you want to sit there today, I can take you." For a second, even Nora looked as though she had misheard him. Constance's eyes lifted to his face at once, sharp with suspicion. "Take me there?" "To the veranda." "In this condition?" "Yes." Her mouth thinned. "Do you make a habit of suggesting foolish things to employers?" Silas did not rush to fill the silence. He glanced toward the glass doors again. Morning light had gathered there, pale and clean, and beyond it the harbor moved in small gray flashes under the sky. "You said you used to sit there," he answered. "If that's what you want instead of the exercises, I can help you get there." Nora set the folded towel down carefully. "Mrs. Marrow, the transfer chair is in the linen room. We could bring it." She sounded cautious, almost afraid to let hope into her voice. "If you truly want to." Constance looked from one to the other, as if they had formed some private plan against her. "And if I say no after you fetch it?" "Then we leave it where it is," Silas said. That simple answer unsettled her more than persuasion would have. She had built her whole routine around resistance, around forcing people either to push back or to retreat. Being given the choice cleanly, without argument, seemed to rob her of the next weapon. At last she said, "The chair straps dig into my shoulders." "I'll pad them," Nora replied before the moment could vanish. "And the light out there is too harsh in the morning. We can lower the shade. And if you jolt me on the threshold, I'll send you both away." Silas gave a small nod. "Then I'll try not to jolt you." That almost brought the old snap back to her face, but something held it in place. Nora was already moving, quick in a way he had not yet seen from her, out to the hall and back again with the transfer chair and 2 folded blankets. The house, which had seemed so stale and careful for days, suddenly carried the brisk sounds of purpose. Wheels over carpet, a cupboard opening, the soft clink of metal buckles. Even the air in the room felt different. The transfer took time, more than time. It took trust of a very narrow kind. Silas checked every strap twice. Nora guided his hands once at the shoulder brace, once at the locking bar, then stepped back and let him do the rest. Constance spoke through clenched teeth almost the whole while. "You're tilting me." "Half an inch," he said. "My arm." "I've got it." "You absolutely do not." Then, a moment later, when he adjusted her wrist exactly right, she stopped talking long enough to breathe. The hardest part was the threshold itself. The metal lip beneath the glass doors caught one wheel before he corrected it. Constance's fingers, as much as she could move them, twitched against the blanket. Nora inhaled sharply. Silas steadied the frame, lifted slightly, and guided her across. Cold sea air met them at once. Not the tired air of the bedroom with its trapped medicine and fading perfume, but real wind, salt, wet wood, distant kelp, a trace of engine smoke from somewhere below. It moved through the veranda in a living way, sliding under the wicker chairs, tapping one loose pane softly in its frame, stirring the edge of the shade Nora had lowered halfway. Dust glimmered in the slanted light. The place had not been used in months, maybe longer. One planter stood empty. Another held dead stems gone silver with neglect. But the view was still wide and beautiful. Water, moorings, gulls turning white against the sky. Constance said nothing. Nora pulled the cover off the nearest chair and folded it over the rail. I'll have someone clean all this properly, she murmured, more to herself than to the others. Silas positioned the chair where the light would warm Constance's hands but not strike her face directly. How's that? She kept looking outward. The left side, 2 inches. He moved her. Now? After a pause, she said, Leave it. That was the first time she had sounded tired rather than combative since he had known her. They stayed there in silence for a while. The harbor made its own conversation. A buoy bell clanged far out. Ropes knocked dully against masts. Somewhere below, men shouted to one another over a crate lift, the words too distant to make out, only the rhythm carrying upward. Silas leaned one shoulder against the wall by the doors, hands loose at his sides. Nora stood behind Constance for a moment, watching the woman's face, then quietly slipped back into the room to fetch the next medicine and left them alone. It was Constance who spoke first. How long were you on the docks? She asked without turning. Most of my adult life. You're not that old. Old enough for the cold to start collecting in the wrong places. A gull swept low past the glass. For the first time in days, something like amusement touched her expression and stayed a fraction longer. And before that? He shrugged. Jobs, whatever paid. You say that as if there's no story in it. There usually isn't, he said. Just bills. She took that in. The wind lifted a strand of hair at her temple. She did not ask him to smooth it away. Below them, the water flashed brighter as the cloud cover thinned. Her eyes stayed on it. My husband used to stand out here before every departure, she said. He said he could tell the mood of the harbor by the sound before sunrise. Silas glanced at her. She had not mentioned her husband by herself before, not like this. Not without the shield of irritation. Could he? He asked. Yes. A beat passed. He was usually right. That word usually had weight in it, more than it seemed to need. If you're listening and this story is finding a place in you, stay with me, because sometimes the first true thing a person says is the one they almost didn't mean to say at all. Constance's gaze drifted lower, toward the far edge of the docks where the old cannery building sat dark and half abandoned. That one closed in spring, didn't it? Silas followed her eyes. Yes. That cost a lot of men their work. It did. And you came here because one broken woman in a big house pays better than a harbor that doesn't need you anymore? He could have softened it. He didn't. Yes. She nodded once, very slightly, as if confirming something private. Then her eyes narrowed at a trawler edging toward the outer moorings. They're bringing her in wrong, she said. Silas looked harder. Crosswinds taking the stern. Exactly. There it was again. The quick authority, the old instinct, the mind that had not gone dull at all, only shut away. He turned back to her just as she leaned the smallest bit forward in the chair, intent on the water. And in a voice that sounded more alive than any she had used yet, she said, Tell me the name on that hull. Silas narrowed his eyes toward the water and leaned slightly closer to the glass. The trawler was angling in through the outer moorings, white hull streaked by use, stern riding just a little wrong in the crosswind exactly as Constance had said. From the veranda, the painted name was partly hidden by glare where the morning light struck the chop. He waited for the boat to turn a fraction more. Harbor Jane, he said. Constance answered at once. No. He looked at her. The Jane was sold last autumn. That's the Ruth Ann. Her gaze stayed fixed on the boat, sharp and certain. See the blue patch near the bow? They covered an old dent there 3 seasons ago after she clipped the fuel pier in fog. Silas looked again, and there it was, a square of darker paint exactly where she had said. He let out a soft breath through his nose. You're right. I usually am when men are docking badly, she replied. And this time the dry line carried a trace of the woman she must once have been. Quick, exact, impossible to ignore. Nora came out with the medicine tray balanced carefully in both hands and stopped when she saw the look on Constance's face. Well, she murmured, almost to herself, that's a sight I've missed. Constance heard her and frowned, as if annoyed to have been caught enjoying anything. Don't turn this into an occasion, Nora. Of course not. But the housekeeper's mouth had already softened. She set the tray on the wicker table and adjusted the napkin. Tea while it's hot. The next half hour passed in an unfamiliar way. Constance still corrected, still complained when the tea was too strong or the blanket folded under her elbow, but her attention kept drifting outward. She asked Silas which pier the fuel barge had been moved to after the storm damage last year. She wanted to know whether the cannery yard was fully shut or only partly leased. When a gull settled on the rail and began pecking at a forgotten clay pot, she waved it off with her eyes and said, "They always act as though they own the place." "Sometimes they do," Silas said. That drew the smallest breath of amusement from Nora, who busied herself refilling the cup to hide it. Then, as sudden as a squall line, Constance's mood turned. It happened when Silas answered one question too easily. She asked how many men had been left without steady work after the cannery closed, and he gave her a rough figure without drama, just the way a dockman would know. Something in that answer seemed to trip a wire inside her. She turned her face away from the view, back toward the veranda floor, and her voice sharpened. "And now you stand here telling stories from the waterfront like a guide with paying guests." Silas blinked once. "You asked." "I asked because silence is worse." Her jaw tightened. "Do not mistake that for interest in your life." "I didn't." "But you were about to," she snapped. "All men with hard hands and patient eyes do that eventually. They start thinking suffering gives them authority." Nora stiffened behind the chair. She had seen this before, the recoil after a moment of ease, the way Constance punished the room whenever it got too close to warmth. The widow had opened a door without meaning to, and now she was slamming it with both words and pride. Silas rested one hand on the back of the transfer chair and stayed still. "All right." That irritated her further. "Stop saying that as if you're the calm one here." He gave a short nod. "And tell me what you want me to say." She looked at him as though the question itself were offensive. "I want you to stop looking at me like that." "Like what?" "Like I'm still someone who belongs in the world out there." The line came out before she could dress it up, and once it was spoken, all three of them heard what sat under it. The harbor went on making its ordinary noise below them. A rope slapped a mast. A gull cried overhead. Somewhere farther out, a horn sounded long and low through the haze. Nora lowered her gaze. Silas did not answer quickly. There are moments when a fast answer is only another kind of cowardice. Finally, he said, "You knew that boat by a paint patch most men would miss." Constance's mouth hardened again. "That proves memory, nothing else." "It proves you were paying attention." "To a trawler? How meaningful." "It mattered to you." She turned those cold blue eyes on him full force. "Do not do that." "Do what?" "Pull meaning out of scraps and call it hope." Silas took the hit without moving. There it was again, that patience under cruelty Nora had warned him about, but now it carried something different. He was beginning to understand that Constance did not lash out only to wound other people. Often she was trying to crush the smallest spark before it could ask anything of her. Nora stepped in gently. "Mrs. Marrow, the air is getting colder. We should think about taking you in." "No." The refusal came fast, almost frightened. Silas looked toward the water. The clouds had thickened, and the clean brightness from earlier was giving way to a flat gray sheen. Rain was still off, but the wind had teeth in it now. He reached for the spare blanket folded over the chair arm and tucked it more securely around her lap. She let him. That alone was worth noticing. After a while, she said, without looking at either of them, "How long did you care for your mother before taking this post?" Silas paused. He had not told her much about home beyond the bare fact that his mother needed help. This question was different, personal in a way her earlier jabs had not been. Nora glanced up sharply, hearing it too. "Long enough to learn the medicine times," he said. "That is not an answer." No, he admitted. It isn't. Constance lifted her chin a fraction. Then answer properly. He looked at her profile against the dull silver harbor, at the woman who had driven away every professional sent to her house, at the same woman who had just sat on the veranda for the first time in months and seemed almost angry at her own interest in the living world. And before he could decide how much truth to give her, Nora's eyes shifted past them both, toward the glass doors behind. Someone was coming down the corridor inside the house, fast enough that even through the closed doors they could hear the hard, uneven beat of shoes on polished floorboards. The footsteps came hard enough to make Nora set the tray down before it rattled off the wicker table. A second later, the veranda doors opened, and a man in a dark overcoat stepped through without waiting to be invited. He was somewhere in his 40s, clean-shaven, well-fed, carrying the sharp smell of expensive tobacco and rain-damp wool. His hair was combed too carefully for a harbor morning. Everything about him said office, not tied. He stopped short when he saw Constance outside, wrapped in blankets, facing the water. "Well," he said, recovering quickly, "that's unexpected." Constance's whole body seemed to stiffen, even what little movement she had. "You might try knocking, Edwin." So that was the name, Edwin. He gave a smile that never reached his eyes. "I was told you were in your room. Nora, you should have informed me." Nora's voice cooled by several degrees. Mrs. Merrill was not taking visitors. And yet here I am. His gaze drifted to Silas then, taking in the rough coat, the stance, the hands. "This must be the new man." Silas said nothing. Edwin took one more step in, though the veranda had suddenly become a smaller place than it was a minute before. "Constance, we need to discuss the board's request. 4 suspended files, old signatures, dormant accounts, all very messy. I would rather deal with it before anyone starts asking questions they don't understand." Constance's face went still in that dangerous way Silas was beginning to recognize. "If you are here about the claims, you may begin by standing somewhere I can see the water behind you." Edwin gave a short laugh, as if indulging an eccentric aunt. "Still dramatic. Fine." He shifted half a step. "The relief account should remain closed. Reopening those files invites scrutiny. Once auditors start pulling at old threads, there is no end to it." Nora's fingers tightened around the edge of the tray. Silas watched Constance instead. He had not heard this man's name before, but he understood him at once. He spoke the language of inconvenience dressed as prudence. Constance asked, "How many claims remain unpaid?" Edwin spread one hand. "A handful." "How many?" He hesitated. 7, depending on classification." "Depending on classification," she repeated softly, with enough contempt to sting. "And the board letter mentions 4 because those are the ones with enough documentation to embarrass you first." His mouth flattened. "This is exactly what I mean. You hear one letter and think you grasp the whole situation." From the corner of his eye, Silas saw Nora glance down. That was not a random line. It had history in it. Constance lifted her chin the smallest bit. "Then explain it." Edwin looked annoyed to be asked, but more annoyed that he could not refuse. "After your husband died, the relief account was left in poor order. There were verbal promises, half-documented pledges, notes without witness signatures, disbursements approved personally by you but never properly transferred into the new trust structure. I cleaned it up as far as possible. The remaining cases are sentimental debris." Silas felt the word land like grit in the mouth. Constance heard it too. "Widows are sentimental debris now?" "Don't twist my meaning." You brought the twist with you. The wind pressed at the shade cloth, making it flap once against the rail. Edwin glanced again at Silas, clearly irritated that a man like him was hearing any of this. "Perhaps we should continue inside, in private." "No," Constance said. "Constance, no." Stronger now. "Say it here." For the first time, Edwin seemed to realize the rules had changed since his last visit. The bedridden widow he was used to managing from a polished chair beside the bed was outside, awake, alert, and very obviously not alone. He adjusted his cuffs, buying time. "You were not well," he said at last. "You still are not. Decisions had to be made. The account was unstable. The estate had other obligations. I protected you." That word did something to her. Silas saw it in the way her eyes sharpened, in the small pulse at her throat. Nora saw it too and went very still. Protection from this man sounded less like care than control. "Protected me from what?" Constance asked. "From opportunists, from people who would exploit your grief, from signing away funds to every sob story that crossed your desk." Her voice dropped lower. "Those were not sob stories." "Some were," he shrugged lightly, as if speaking plain truth to a child. "And even if they were not, charity cannot be run on impulse." The harbor seemed to fade for a moment. No gulls, no ropes, no distant engines. Just Edwin's careful voice and the cold anger rising behind Constance's stillness. Silas did not plan to speak. This was not his ground. But when Edwin let his eyes pass over him again and said, "You see how it looks?" One underqualified attendant hears a few names, and suddenly everyone imagines they understand maritime finance. The words came out before he could stop them. "They're not names to the families waiting on them." Edwin turned fully then, disbelief plain on his face. "I'm sorry. Were you under the impression I'd asked for your view?" Silas held his stare. "No." "Then keep it to yourself." Nora inhaled, but Constance spoke before either of them could move. "He stays," she said. Edwin blinked. "Excuse me?" "He stays," she repeated, every word clipped clean. "If you are going to explain why widows were left waiting while my account was cleaned up, he will hear it too." "That is absurd. Try a better adjective." He looked from her to Silas and back again, and something ugly flickered behind the polished manner at last. Not rage exactly, contempt, exposed too quickly to hide. "Very well," he said. "If we're abandoning standards completely, let's speak plainly. The account was bleeding money long before I froze it. Your husband approved cases because he couldn't bear to refuse anyone from the fleet. You approved more because guilt made you careless. And after he died..." He stopped, but too late. Constance's face went white. Even the wind seemed to pause. Edwin knew at once he had stepped into something dangerous, yet instead of backing away, he chose the worst possible thing. He lowered his voice, almost gentle now, which made it crueler. "You were in no state to oversee any of it after the call." Silas saw Nora close her eyes for one beat, as if bracing for impact. Constance did not speak. Her hands, such as they could move, remained under the blanket. Her gaze fixed somewhere beyond Edwin, beyond the rail, beyond the harbor itself. Every trace of that living spark from a few minutes earlier had gone out of her face. And in that terrible hush, Silas understood there was a story buried beneath all of this. Not just unpaid claims, not just a dead husband, but one call, one moment, one wound so deep that even this man knew how to use it against her. Then Constance drew in a thin breath and said, without looking at any of them, "Get out." Edwin did not move. "Constance, listen to me." This time her voice cut through the veranda like broken glass. "I said get out. Before I ask the dock man what a man of your size weighs when he's thrown down 3 front steps." Edwin went pale before he went proud. For one long second, he seemed to be weighing whether Constance still had enough force left in her life to make good on the threat. Then he looked at Silas, took in the broad shoulders, the harbor hands, the expression that had gone very still, and decided he preferred dignity to risk. He straightened his cuffs again, though the gesture had lost its polish. "You're upset," he said, already backing toward the doors. "We'll speak when you're calmer." Constance's eyes did not leave him. "No, we won't." He tried one last glance at Nora, perhaps hoping for an ally, but the housekeeper's face had shut like a door. Very well, he muttered. Enjoy your sea air. Then he turned and left, his shoes striking the floorboards inside with far less confidence than when he had arrived. The veranda doors closed behind him with a flat final sound. No one spoke. The wind moved the shade again. Somewhere down at the harbor, a winch squealed, then fell quiet. Constance was staring straight ahead, but she no longer seemed to see the water. Her face had gone ashen under the morning light. The spark that had risen in her while she watched the trawler had been snuffed out so completely it was painful to witness. Nora recovered first. "We should take you back in," she said softly. "No." The word came automatically, but it had no strength in it. "You're freezing." Only then did Silas notice the slight shiver under the blanket, the way her shoulders had drawn tight. He stepped around the chair and crouched enough to catch her gaze. "You can sit by the window inside," he said. "You'll still see the harbor." That reached her where comfort alone would not. After a moment, she closed her eyes and gave the smallest nod. The transfer back to the bedroom was harder than the one out. Not physically, in another way. Constance offered no complaints this time, no cutting remarks, no corrections. She seemed to have folded inward, as though Edwin had dragged an old wound into the open and left it bleeding where all of them could see. Nora busied herself with the straps and blankets, hands quick but gentle. Silas guided the chair over the threshold and into the room, where the air suddenly felt stale again after the wind outside. Once she was settled in bed, Nora poured tea with a hand that shook only once. "I'll bring something warm from the kitchen," she said. "Broth, maybe." Constance did not answer. Silas adjusted the pillows, pulled the blanket higher, and reached for the shawl she liked. As he draped it over her shoulders, she flinched from the contact itself, as if touch had become too intimate for the state she was in. "Leave me alone," she whispered. Nora froze at the door. Silas stood still for a beat. "All right." He and Nora stepped into the corridor and pulled the door nearly closed behind them. The hallway felt dim after the brightness of the veranda. Beeswax, old carpet, a faint trace of cedar from the linen cupboard. Downstairs, somebody in the kitchen shut an oven door. Life in the house kept going, unaware that something important had cracked upstairs. Nora pressed a hand to the wall and let out a breath she had clearly been holding since Edwin arrived. "That man," she said, her voice low and tired, "always knows exactly where to put the knife." Silas looked back at the almost shut door. What call was he talking about? Nora did not answer at once. She rubbed her thumb against the seam of her apron, a small, nervous habit he had not seen before. "I shouldn't." He used it against her. "I know." "Then I should understand what I'm standing in the middle of." The housekeeper closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, there was no defiance in them, only old sorrow. Her husband was at sea when the storm took his vessel. Far enough. The wireless on board went bad, so the message was relayed to the house by telephone from the harbor office. She swallowed. "They called here. They said he wanted to speak to her." Silas felt the floor under him, solid and polished, and suddenly very far away. Nora went on. "They had argued that morning, about the relief account of all things, about money leaving too quickly, about captains vouching for men, about whether promises should be written more carefully. He left angry. She stayed angry." Nora's voice thinned. "When the call came, she refused it, told the maid to say she would not be summoned like a clerk." Silas said nothing. "The boat never made it back," Nora finished. "By the time another message came, it was news." The hall seemed to narrow around that truth. Inside the bedroom, nothing moved. No voice, no bell, no rustle of sheets, only silence. Nora's eyes shone, though she blinked the tears back before they could fall. "From that day on, she's believed every kindness comes with accusation attached. Every helper, every visitor, every piece of advice, she hears the same thing underneath it. You should have answered. You should have answered. So she drives people away first. Silas leaned one shoulder against the wall and stared at the floor runner with its faded vine pattern. At last he understood the force behind the cruelty, and understanding it did not make it lighter. It made it sadder. A whole life narrowed to one unpicked moment. That letter from the widow, he said quietly. She kept it because it sounded like a promise she broke. Yes. And the claims? She stopped looking at them. Then she stopped signing. Then Edwin did what Edwin does, turned grief into paperwork and called it protection. Nora wiped at the corner of one eye with the back of her wrist. I've served this house 15 years. I've seen storms tear masts in half and families lose everything in one tide. I've never seen punishment work the way she thinks it does. It hasn't brought him back. It's only buried her alive. From inside the room came a sound at last. Not a shout, not the ring of the bell. Just the dull crack of something small striking the floorboards. Nora and Silas looked at each other. Then came another sound, thinner, worse. A telephone receiver being lifted and a woman's voice inside the room saying to no one they could see, "No, tell him I'm not coming to the line." Silas was through the door before Nora could stop him. The bedroom felt wrong at once, split open somehow. The receiver of the old bedside telephone hung crooked in its cradle. One of the porcelain pill dishes had fallen and cracked on the floorboards. Constance lay half-turned against the pillows, eyes fixed on something far beyond the ceiling, her lips moving around the same words as if they belonged to another year. "No, tell him I'm not coming to the line." Nora came in behind Silas and drew a breath that shook. "Mrs. Marrow?" No response. Silas crossed to the bed slowly, careful the way a man approaches a frightened animal or an injured one. He had seen this kind of absence before, in his grandmother after her stroke, when memory and present time slid over one another and left her stranded between them. If you yanked a person back too fast, you only frightened them more. So he did not say her name first. He looked at the window latch, still cracked open from earlier, and quietly shut it. The harbor sounds dulled. Then he bent enough for his voice to reach her without crowding. "The call is over," he said. Constance's eyes flicked once, but not to him. "No, he's angry." Silas glanced at Nora. The housekeeper had one hand over her mouth. "He isn't here now," Silas said gently. "You're in your room." Her brow tightened, as if she was hearing him through water. "I told them no." "I know." Something in that answer made her blink, just enough to feel the edge of the present. Nora stepped closer with a damp cloth she must have grabbed from the washstand. "Mrs. Marrow, it's Nora. You're safe." That word seemed to trouble her. Safe, as if she had never believed it applied to her after that day. She swallowed, but the look in her eyes was still distant and glassy. Silas reached past the cracked dish and lifted the phone receiver properly onto its cradle. The tiny click sounded louder than it should have in the room. Constance's gaze dropped toward the sound. "There," he said quietly. "No one is waiting on the line." At last, she looked at him. Truly looked, not through him. Her face changed by degrees, confusion first, then recognition, then a wave of shame so sudden and raw that Nora had to turn away for a second. Constance's voice scraped thin. "What did I—" "You had a hard moment," Nora said quickly. But Constance knew better. She always did. Her eyes went to the broken dish on the floor, to the phone, to the closed door as if measuring how much of herself had spilled in front of witnesses. For a heartbeat, Silas thought the old cruelty would return at full force, because shame often came dressed that way in her. Instead, she whispered, "You heard." It was not a question. Silas straightened the blanket where it had twisted around her waist. "Yes." "Then go." He did not move. Constance's throat worked once. "I said go." Nora bent to gather the broken porcelain pieces, partly to tidy, partly to give the woman a little cover from her own humiliation. "It's all right," she murmured. "No, it isn't." Constance's eyes stayed on Silas. "You wanted the truth. There it is. Are you satisfied now? Do I seem properly ruined?" The words were edged, but the force had gone out of them halfway through. This was not one of her attacks. It was exposure trying to put on armor too late. Silas took the cracked dish from Nora before she could cut her fingers and laid the pieces on the tray. "I'm not here to be satisfied." Constance shut her eyes hard. "That is such a cruel thing to say kindly." He let that sit. Downstairs, a door opened and closed. Somewhere a kettle began to hiss. The ordinary sounds of the house rose through the floor, steady and small, and because of that steadiness, the silence upstairs felt even more intimate. After a while, Nora carried the tray to the washstand and turned her back to give them privacy without leaving. She knew something had shifted, and if she interrupted too soon, it would shut again. Constance opened her eyes. "You think you understand me now?" "No." "Then what do you think?" Silas pulled the chair from the writing desk and sat, not too close to the bed. Close enough to stay. "I think you've been answering that phone in your head for a long time." Her face tightened. One tear slipped from the outer corner of her eye before she could stop it. She looked furious at it, which only made it sadder. "You don't know anything about it." "No," he said. "Only what it looks like when a person gets stuck in one moment and keeps living there." That made her study him differently. The anger hesitated. Nora spoke softly from the washstand. "Your grandmother," she said, remembering something he had mentioned in passing days earlier. Silas nodded once. "After her stroke, sometimes she thought my grandfather was still coming in from the yard. She'd tell us to warm his supper. If we argued with her, she panicked. If we met her where she was and walked her back slowly, she settled." He looked at Constance again. Different cause, same kind of trap. The room held that comparison carefully. It was risky, but it was honest, and honesty had begun to reach places flattery never could. Constance let out a thin breath. "So now I am a trap." "No," he said. "You're a person caught in one." That landed between them and stayed there. If this story has your heart right now, stay with me. Because sometimes the first real mercy in a house like this is not a grand speech. It's one plain sentence that refuses to lie. Constance turned her face slightly toward the window. The harbor was only a dull stripe now through the glass, the light flattened by noon cloud. "He called from the office first," she said after a long silence. "I didn't take that one either." Nora froze with the folded cloth still in her hand. Silas did not speak. Constance went on, her voice rough and low, like she hated each word but had run out of strength to keep them locked up. Then they rang again later. Harbor office. Different voice, more urgent. I knew what it was. I knew. Her mouth trembled once. "And I still told the maid to say no." Nora made a small, aching sound. Constance stared at nothing. "For years I told myself I was only angry. Then I told myself I didn't understand what refusing meant. Then I told myself there would have been nothing useful to say anyway." She swallowed. "All lies. I wanted him to feel shut out the way I felt shut out. Just once. Just for an hour." Her eyes flicked to the phone. "And that hour became the last thing between us." No one in the room moved. Then Silas asked the question no one else had dared to ask her plainly. "What would you have said if you had picked up?" The question seemed to take the air out of the room. Constance did not answer at first. Her eyes stayed on the old telephone as if it had become something alive again, something with memory in its cord and accusation in its little brass bell. Nora stood by the washstand with the damp cloth in both hands, not moving now, not even pretending to tidy. The whole room had narrowed to that one question. What would you have said? Constance's mouth opened once, then closed. When she finally spoke, her voice had none of the edge it usually carried. It was the voice of a woman speaking into a dark space and hearing it echo back at her. "I don't know," she whispered. Silas did not fill the silence for her. That mattered. Too many people rush to help when what they really do is cover. He had learned that on docks, in sick rooms, in the narrow kitchen of his mother's flat. Sometimes a person only reaches the truth when no one rescues them from the pause before it. Constance shut her eyes. No, that's not true. Her throat moved. I know exactly what I would have said. Nora lowered her head. Constance drew one shaky breath, then another. I would have said, don't hang up first. Her face tightened around the words. That was what I was angriest about. Not the money, not the account, not the argument. He had a habit of ending a call before I finished my thought. A bitter little breath escaped her, half laugh, half grief. Such a stupid thing. Such a small, stupid thing to carry into a storm. She turned her face away, but not before Silas saw tears gathering again. And then I would have said, come home before dark. I always said that, even when I was furious, even when I meant the opposite. Her lips trembled. And after that, maybe nothing. Maybe I would have listened. Maybe he would have cursed the weather and told me I was impossible. Maybe we would have stayed angry another hour and forgiven each other at supper. She swallowed hard. I don't know. I only know I denied us the chance to find out. There it was at last. Not just guilt, not only regret, the unbearable weight of a future that had been cut off by one stubborn refusal. Nora made a small sound, soft and wounded. Mrs. Marrow. But Constance raised her eyes to Silas, and there was no shield left in them now. Do you understand why I cannot bear it? She asked. When people speak to me of moving on. Moving on to what? A life built on the last thing I gave him being silence? Silas leaned forward in the chair, forearms resting on his knees, hands clasped. Rough hands, honest hands. The same ones she had mocked when he first walked into the house. I understand why you're trapped there, he said. I don't think staying trapped fixes it. Her face hardened a fraction, more from pain than offense. That is very easy for a man outside the fire to say. Yes, he answered. It is. The plainness of that reply caught her. He had not argued, had not dressed himself up as some wise rescuer. He had only refused to flatter her pain. After a moment, he added, But I've seen what happens when people turn one moment into the whole house they live in. My mother did it after my father left. For years, she treated every late knock like bad news. Every raised voice sounded like another departure. She kept supper warm for a man who wasn't coming back, not because she loved him so much, but because anger made the empty chair feel active. He glanced down at the broken porcelain on the tray. It nearly swallowed the rest of her life. Constance listened despite herself. She got out of it slowly, he went on. Not by pretending it didn't hurt, by admitting it did, and then still boiling water, still paying bills, still taking care of the people right in front of her. He lifted his eyes to hers. Pain doesn't become noble just because it lasts a long time. That landed hard. Nora looked at him, startled. Constance did too. For one heartbeat, the old reflex rose fast in her face. Silas had gone too near the bone. He saw it and did not retreat. If anything was going to reach her now, it had to be truer than comfort. You think I enjoy this? She asked, her voice suddenly sharper. No. You think I chose it every day? I think the first day chose you, he said quietly. Then the next days got easier to surrender to. The room went very still again. A gull cried outside, muffled through the closed window. Downstairs, the kettle stopped hissing. Nora set the damp cloth aside at last and came closer, laying a folded handkerchief within Constance's reach, even though all three of them knew she could not take it without help. It was a tender, ordinary gesture, and perhaps because it was ordinary, it almost undid the woman in the bed. Constance stared at the handkerchief. You both speak as if there is still something left of me to save. Nora answered before Silas could. There is. The housekeeper's voice was quiet, but it carried years in it. I knew you before this room swallowed you. I knew you when you would read every file yourself, when you remembered widows' children by name, when you sent coal without waiting for winter to turn cruel. I knew the woman who made half this harbor believe being poor did not mean being invisible. Her eyes shone openly now. She is not dead, madam. She is hiding. Constance's face crumpled for a second and then fought its way back into shape. You should not say kind things when I have done cruel ones. That is exactly when kind things need saying, Nora replied. If you've stayed with me this far, you can feel it, can't you? The moment where a person can still turn away, and yet something inside them finally grows too tired to keep lying. Constance looked from Nora to Silas and back again. The pride was still there, the intelligence too. But under both was sheer exhaustion, the kind that comes not from illness alone, but from holding the same punishment in place year after year. What if I answer it now? She said suddenly. Silas frowned slightly. Answer what? The call. She turned her eyes toward the telephone. What if I pick it up now and say the words anyway? To no one, to air, to a dead man who cannot hear me. Her voice shook once. Would that satisfy your practical mind? He thought before speaking. No. Something like anger flashed. Of course. But it might tell the truth out loud, he said. And that could be a beginning. Constance stared at the phone again. Her breathing had changed. Slower, deeper. Nora silently moved the chair away from the bed so the path to the telephone table would be clear, as if some part of her believed the moment needed physical space. Constance wet her lips. Nora, bring it here. The housekeeper's hand flew to her mouth again. Silas rose from the chair, and as he reached for the telephone, he saw that Constance was no longer looking at the instrument itself. She was looking at the drawer that held her husband's watch. Silas followed her gaze to the drawer and understood before she said it. Open it, Constance whispered. His hand hesitated only a moment on the brass pull. Inside, on the dark velvet, lay the watch he had wound for her, the gold worn soft at the edges, the chain folded neatly where he had placed it. It ticked with that patient, stubborn little sound that seemed too small to carry the weight it carried. Nora moved closer without speaking. The room smelled faintly of tea gone cool, wool blankets, and the salt that still clung to their clothes from the veranda. Constance kept her eyes on the watch. Put it beside the phone. Silas lifted it carefully and set it on the table near the telephone base. The ticking and the silence began to share the same space. For a second, no one moved. Then Nora, hands shaking only a little, unplugged the line from the wall jack with a soft click. Constance noticed. What are you doing? Nora swallowed. Giving you the room to say what you need to say, without anyone calling back into it. Something passed over Constance's face then. Gratitude, maybe. Fear, too. She looked at the dead receiver, at the watch, at her own reflection ghosted in the window glass beyond the bed. I don't know how to begin. Silas stood at the foot of the bed, not crowding her. Begin badly if that's all you have. That earned the faintest broken breath from her, closer to the memory of one. She stared at the receiver another moment, then nodded. Nora lifted it and set it gently into the cradle of Constance's left hand, supporting the weight she could not quite manage alone. The old black earpiece rested against her shoulder. The cord curved across the blanket like a line thrown into deep water. Constance closed her eyes. Elias, she said. Just the name at first. Nothing more. The moment it left her mouth, her lips trembled. Her husband became real in the room in a new way, as a man once spoken to across ordinary distance. I was angry, she whispered into the dead line. I wanted you to wait. I wanted you to feel what it was like when I thought you were not listening. Her breathing went shallow. Nora steadied the receiver against her hand. And I was wrong. I was proud and foolish And I thought there would be another hour, another supper, another chance to finish the argument. Tears slid into her hairline. She didn't seem to notice. I should have answered. I should have heard your voice. I should have told you to come home. I should have said I loved you before anything else. Silas looked away for a moment, giving her what privacy he could while staying present. The clock on the mantel ticked. The watch on the table ticked back, quicker, finer, like a smaller heart answering the larger one in the room. Outside, a gull cried once and faded. Constance kept going now, because once truth has been dragged into the light, sometimes it refuses to go back quietly. I have punished everyone for that day, she said. Nora, the widows, the servants, men sent to help me. I punished them because I could not punish time. I punished myself because I could not bear that you died still believing I meant the silence. Her mouth tightened. If there is any mercy where you are, if there is any hearing left between us, know this. It was because I loved being right for one more hour, and I have hated that hour ever since. Nora was crying openly now, one hand pressed against her apron. Silas had seen grief in poor rooms, in harbor sheds, on church steps after winter burials. But this was different. This was what happened when grief had been kept sealed too long and finally found a crack. It came out with shame, with pride still clinging to it, with old habits trying and failing to hold it back. At last, Constance fell silent. Her chest rose and fell unevenly. The receiver slid a little, and Nora caught it before it dropped. No one spoke for several seconds. Then Constance opened her eyes and looked not at Nora, not at the telephone, but at Silas. There was no cruelty in her face at all now, only exhaustion, and something else. Terror, almost childlike in its honesty. "What happens now?" she asked. Silas answered the only way he could. "Now you rest." She gave the tiniest shake of her head. "No, after this." He thought of the widow's letter, the suspended claims, Edwin using the word debris, the names folded into official paper like they were numbers. He thought of the woman on the veranda naming a trawler from a paint patch. He thought of the housekeeper saying the old Constance was hiding, not gone. "After this," he said slowly, "you decide whether all that pain keeps rotting in this room, or whether it starts doing some good for people who are left waiting." Nora looked at him sharply, hearing the turn in it. Constance's gaze drifted to the side table where the harbor board letter still lay under the older envelope. Her throat moved once. "You make it sound simple. It won't be." "No," her voice strengthened by a grain. "It won't." The tears had spent themselves for the moment. In their place was that clear, cold intelligence he had glimpsed on the veranda, only now it was mixed with something humbler, less certain. She seemed to be measuring a road she had refused to look at for years. Then, very quietly, she said, "There's a dispatch box in the cedar chest, under the shawls." Nora frowned through her tears. "The old one?" "Yes." Silas crossed to the chest and lifted the lid. Beneath the folded wool and lavender sachets, his hand found a flat walnut box with brass corners dulled by age. It was heavier than it looked. When he set it on the blanket, Constance stared at it as if at a grave marker. "The key," she murmured, "is taped under the bottom edge." He turned it carefully. The small key was there, exactly where she said. Nora whispered, "Mrs. Marrow, are you sure?" Constance did not answer her. She only kept her eyes on Silas as he slid the key into the lock. And when the mechanism clicked open, he saw at once that this was no ordinary box at all. The inside of the box smelled of old paper, cedar, and salt that had somehow outlived the years. Silas lifted the lid fully and saw bundles, not trinkets. No love letters tied with ribbon, no private keepsakes meant only for mourning. This was work. Files stacked in careful layers, receipts pinned with rusting clips, small envelopes marked in ink by hand, ledger pages folded over with notes in the margins. One packet was labeled winter coal, Another, school fees. Another, gear loss claims. Beneath those sat a leather-bound register stamped Mariners Relief Society, the gold letters cracked with age. Nora let out a soft breath. I'd forgotten how much there was. Constance gave a tired little shake of her head. I never forgot. I only stopped opening it. Silas lifted the top ledger and laid it across the blanket where she could see. The paper was thick and yellowed, written in several hands over the years, but one hand appeared again and again in the notes. Fast, firm, unmistakably hers. Approved in full. Send before Friday tide. Child with fever. Expedite. Husband lost overboard. Waive delay. There were names on every page, families. Addresses near the docks, the lower lane, the old key houses. This was all yours? He asked. Ours, Constance said. Mine and Elias's. He knew the captains. I knew the wives. We started small. Her eyes stayed on the register. Fuel money one winter, then school books, then burial costs when the insurance stalled. After that it grew because the need never stopped growing. Nora touched one of the bundles with the tips of her fingers, almost reverently. There were nights you sat up till midnight reading applications. Constance closed her eyes briefly. I remember. Silas opened another packet. Inside were thin, folded requests, each marked with dates and brief pencil notes. One asked for boots for 2 boys after their father broke a leg unloading catch. Another requested sewing money for a widow trying to keep rent paid by mending sails. One file held a receipt for medicine and a note in Constance's hand. Deliver quietly, preserve the father's pride if possible. He looked up at her. This wasn't charity for show. Her mouth tightened. No, it was meant to work. Outside, a gust brushed the window and faded. The room had gone very still again, but now it was a working stillness, not the frozen kind that had ruled the place before. Nora pulled the bedside table closer. Silas set the dispatch box on it and began sorting the papers into neater piles, as if instinct told him order might help her look at them longer. Constance watched him do it. You handle documents like cargo. He almost smiled. Everything shifts if it isn't stacked right. That answer seemed to please some practical part of her. She nodded toward a bundle wrapped with dark string. That one. Silas untied it. Inside were thicker files, more recent than the others, and harder to look at. They were the claims Edwin had called debris, and then some. Widow assistance reviews left unfinished. School grants suspended. Emergency rent requests unanswered. At the top sat a single page with a list of names and dates under the heading Pending Personal Verification. Her own handwriting again, but the ink trailed off at the end as if the pen had lost force before the thought did. How many? Silas asked quietly. Too many, Constance said. Nora swallowed. After the funeral, you tried for a while. Then fewer files got signed. Then Edwin said everything needed restructuring. She looked at the stack as if it accused her too. I should have pushed harder. No, Constance said at once, opening her eyes. That belongs to me. Silas read the top names without speaking them aloud. Some were widows. Some were older children on the edge of leaving school. Some had notes like, revisit in person, or verify boat loss through harbor office. One line had been underlined twice, urgent before winter. There's more than money in here, he said. Yes, Constance replied. Money was the easy part. The hard part was knowing who truly needed watching over and who only needed a bridge for a month or 2. Her gaze sharpened, old intelligence rising through the exhaustion. If you give blindly, the loudest person gets the purse. If you wait too long, the proudest person starves first. Silas looked at her differently after that sentence. This was the woman Nora had meant. Still present, still exact. A mind built for judgment, not pity. He turned another page. These notes, they're detailed. They had to be. A hint of the old authority entered her tone. One widow could manage on fish market work, but not school fees. Another needed legal help because compensation was being stalled by men who hoped grief would make her careless. One boy could finish his apprenticeship if someone paid for tools, but only if his uncle was sober enough to keep him housed. She drew a slow breath. People like Edwin call that disorder because it refuses to fit a clean column. Nora gave a quiet sound of agreement. If this story means something to you, stay with me, because this is the part people often miss. A life does not always come back through comfort first. Sometimes it comes back through responsibility. Silas reached the bottom of the bundle and found a shorter list on thicker paper. Only 15 names this time. Several were marked with circles, stars, or short notes in the margin. Last attempt. No reply sent. Priority. Verify personally. He held that sheet a little longer. What's this one? Constance saw it and went still. For a few seconds, she did not answer at all. The ticking of the watch on the bedside table seemed louder again. Nora looked from the list to Constance and back. She knew this paper too, and whatever it was, it sat closer to the center than the others. At first, Constance said slowly, when I could no longer trust myself to judge anything, I told myself I would return to these personally. Just the ones I thought might still be salvaged if someone got there in time. Her voice roughened. I never went. I never sent anyone either. Silas lowered the page just enough to see her face clearly. Who are they? Constance looked straight at him then, with shame still in her eyes, but something sturdier beginning to form beneath it. The ones I may still be able to help, she said, if I can bear to know what became of them. Then she drew one careful breath and added, and I need someone to go find out. Silas did not answer her right away. The list lay in his hand, heavier than paper should have been. 15 names, 15 addresses in different corners of the harbor district and the streets behind it. Some had little notes beside them in Constance's hand. Widow with 2 boys, apprenticeship interrupted, mother ill, urgent before winter. Each line felt less like a case and more like a door that had been left closed too long. The watch ticked beside the unplugged telephone. Nora stood near the lamp with both hands clasped, her eyes moving from Silas to Constance, as if she knew the next answer might alter the whole shape of the house. What exactly are you asking? He said at last. Constance held his gaze. There was no hauteur in her now, no polished contempt to hide behind. I'm asking you to go where I did not go. Knock on those doors. Tell me who still needs help, who found another way, who despises my name, who has every right to. Her voice roughened on that last part, but she did not look away. I am asking for truth, not comfort. Nora moved closer to the bed. Mrs. Marrow, he's only just begun here. That is a great deal to put on him. It is, Constance said. Silas looked down at the page again. One address he knew at once, Lower Netter's Row. Another was near the Cooper's yard where his father had once picked up work. He could picture those streets before he even stood in them, the wet stones, the fish scales ground pale into the cracks, laundry lines strung between narrow windows, children learning too young how to recognize trouble by footsteps. This was his world more than hers now. And perhaps that was why she had asked him and not Edwin, not a solicitor, not any polished man who would come back with clean summaries and half the truth shaved off. If I go, he said slowly, I won't promise they'll speak kindly. I would distrust kindness more than anger, she replied. And if what I bring back is ugly, then at least it will be real. That answer settled it for him before he admitted it to himself. He folded the list once, carefully, and tucked it into the inside pocket of his coat. All right, I'll start after my shift tomorrow. For the first time since he had entered the Marrow house, Constance looked relieved without fighting it. The change was small, almost too quiet to notice, but it moved through her whole face. Nora saw it too. The housekeeper blinked fast, reached for the shawl at Constance's shoulders, and fussed with a fold that did not need fussing just to steady her own hands. Constance spoke again, more practically now, the old working part of her mind returning in cautious steps. Begin with the circled names. They were the most urgent when I marked them. If any have already stabilized, move to the starred ones. The underlined addresses. She paused, pressing back a tremor. Those were young people. Children then, nearly adults now, I suppose. Some depended on school fees, some on trade placements. I stopped following them when I stopped following everything. Silas nodded. I'll write down what I learn. No. Her eyes sharpened. Remember it first. Write it after. People speak differently when they think you are filling a ledger. He almost smiled. You still know how to do this. The line hit her harder than he meant it to. She blinked, looked toward the dispatch box, then toward the harbor stripe beyond the window. Perhaps, she said. Or perhaps I only remember the shape of what I abandoned. If this story is holding you now, stay with me. Because sometimes a person begins to come back to life the moment they stop asking to be forgiven first and start asking what still can be repaired. The rest of the afternoon became strangely ordered. Nora brought broth, and Constance actually drank it while Silas sorted the bundles into piles she could bear to face. One stack for widow claims, one for interrupted schooling, one for pending harbor disputes. He found old receipts with her signatures, little notes clipped to envelopes, and a small map of the district with 3 houses marked in blue pencil. She explained why one family needed coal instead of cash, why another should never be approached through the brother-in-law, why a proud widow would refuse direct help but accept rent paid quietly through the grocer. As she spoke, the room changed again. The air did not feel so stale. The bed still held an ill woman, the phone still sat mute, the grief still lived there. But now there was work on the blanket between them, and work has a way of making even sorrow sit up straighter. By early evening, fatigue finally took hold of her. Her voice thinned, her eyelids lowered more often. Still, she fought sleep long enough to say, "Tomorrow, before you leave, I want the list read back to me once. So you know I copied it, right? So I know I did not lose my nerve overnight." Nora helped settle her against fresh pillows while Silas closed the dispatch box and slid it back onto the table. The watch kept ticking. The telephone remained unplugged. Neither object seemed quite as monstrous as it had earlier. Just placed. At the door, as he reached for his coat, Constance called his name. He turned. She was looking at him in that direct way of hers, but the scorn had gone out of it. What remained was harder to receive because it was unguarded. "If one of them asks why I waited so long," she said, "do not make excuses for me." "I won't." "Good." She let out a slow breath. "And if one of them slams the door in your face, then I'll step off the porch and try the next house." A faint, tired nod. "You really were raised among stubborn people." He opened the door, and Nora followed him into the corridor a moment later. The hall had gone dusky. Lamps were being lit downstairs one by one, throwing warm squares onto the runner. She touched his sleeve before he could go. "She hasn't looked like that in 2 years, Nora whispered. "Like what?" "Afraid. And willing." Silas glanced back toward the half-closed bedroom door. "Tomorrow might undo all of it." Nora shook her head. "Or begin the rest of it." The next morning came gray and damp. Before daylight had properly settled, Silas stood at Constance's bedside while she made him read every name on that folded list out loud. She corrected one address from memory, added a note about a widow who hated pity but trusted bakers. Then she listened as he folded the paper again and slipped it inside his coat. "Go first to Lower Netter's Row," she said. "House with the blue door that used to stick in wet weather." Silas paused. "Used to?" Her eyes stayed on him. "We're about to find out." And an hour later, with harbor mist clinging to his collar and those 15 names against his chest, he stood in front of that same blue door and heard footsteps approaching from the other side. The footsteps on the other side stopped right in front of the blue door. Then the latch scraped once, stuck for half a second exactly the way Constance had remembered, and the door opened inward with a small jerk. A woman stood there in a faded cardigan with flower on one sleeve and a wary look already fixed in place. She was somewhere past 40, hair pinned in a hurry, eyes tired in the way harbor people's eyes get tired, never fully shut, always half waiting for the next demand. Yes? Silas took off his cap. Morning. I'm looking for Mrs. Della Haynes. Her expression changed at once, not to welcome, but to alarm. Why? He did not answer too fast. The hallway behind her smelled of damp wool, boiled potatoes, and yeast. A child coughed somewhere deeper in the house. Through a narrow back window, he could see laundry trembling on a line above a patch of cracked yard. Nothing in that doorway invited speeches. I came from Marrow House, he said. The woman's face closed like a fist. You're late. There was no point denying it. I know. She gave a short, bitter laugh through her nose. Do you? Because when people come from that house, they usually come with apologies folded so neatly they think it counts as payment. She kept one hand on the door, not letting it open another inch. What do you want? Only to ask how things stand. How things stand? Her voice sharpened. My husband's been dead 3 winters. My eldest quit school at 14. My youngest still thinks strangers at the door mean debt or trouble. That's how things stand. Silas let the words land. No excuse, no softening. Behind her, a boy of about 10 peered around the doorframe, all elbows and suspicion, then vanished when she glanced back. I'm not here to argue with any of that, Silas said. Mrs. Marrow asked me to come hear it properly. At the name, real anger flashed. Asked now, after all this time. Yes. The woman studied him again, taking in the coat, the harbor boots, the hands that didn't belong to clerks. Something in that seemed to complicate the picture she had expected. You're not from the house. No. Then why are you doing her errands? Silas thought of answering plainly, because plainness had served him so far. I work for her now. I used to work the docks. That gave him one narrow inch of ground. Not trust, recognition. She knew the difference between a man sent with polished phrases and one who knew what rope burns looked like after rain. Still, she did not stand aside. Mrs. Haynes, he said, if you'd rather slam the door, I'll step off the porch and report that too. But if there's anything still needed here, I'd rather hear it from you than from whatever scraps the harbor board has filed away. The woman held his gaze for another long second. Then she opened the door just enough to let him stand out of the wind inside the threshold. 2 minutes, she said. No more. The house was small and careful. A scrubbed table, a patched rug, a kettle blackened at the bottom, the kind of room where every object had earned its place. Della Haynes did not ask him to sit. She stayed standing near the table, arms folded. You want the ledger version? Fine. Rent current because I bake for the market 3 mornings a week. The grocer still extends credit, but not kindly. My eldest, Jonah, works the cooper's yard and comes home too tired to speak. The younger one, Ben, still reads by borrowed lamp because I could never replace the school fees after he was sent back half-time. She swallowed once. And if Mrs. Marrow wants to know whether I cursed her name, tell her I did, often. Silas nodded. I will. That answer made her blink, as if she had braced for defense and found none. He asked a few more questions carefully, not leading, not prying beyond what she offered. Had anyone from the society come after the last letter? No. Had the insurance dispute ever cleared in full? Partly, then stalled. Were the boys healthy? Mostly. Was anything most urgent now? At that, her mouth tightened. Books, she said at last, hating the answer. Not food. We manage food. Books, proper boots for Ben before winter, and a way to keep Jonah from thinking work is the only future left in the world. Silas remembered every word. When he finally stepped back onto the street, the air smelled of fish brine and wet stone. He took the folded list from his pocket and put a small mark beside Della Haynes's name. Not numbers, just enough to carry the truth home. The second address lay near the Cooper's Lane, in a narrow terrace where the doors sat almost flush to the street. There he found not a widow, but a young woman stacking tins on a shelf in the front room of a corner chemist shop. Mara Ellison, 22 now, if Constance's file was right. She wore a pale apron and moved quickly, but there was an old student neatness about the labels she straightened. When he gave his name and mentioned Marrow House, the tin in her hand nearly slipped. "She's alive?" Mara asked before she could stop herself. "Yes. And sending people out now?" "Yes." The girl laughed once, but there was no mockery in it, only disbelief. "I thought something terrible must have happened." Then, after a while, I told myself, people with money simply forget more cleanly than the rest of us. She set the tin down and wiped her hands on the apron. "She paid for 3 terms of my nursing course. Then it stopped. No letter, no warning, just stopped." Silas felt the shape of that silence again, repeating itself in other lives. "Did you leave the course?" "5th term." Her eyes lowered. "I took this job here. Meant it to be temporary." She looked around the tiny shop with its rows of cough syrup and soap cakes. "That was over a year ago. Would you go back?" Her answer came too fast to be planned. "Tomorrow." That single word carried more heartbreak than any speech. He asked what stood in the way. Fees, of course, uniform costs, a slot reopening. Pride, though she didn't name that one. When he left, she followed him to the door and said very quietly, "If she truly means to ask after people now, don't let her do it halfway." "I won't," he said, and meant it more than he expected to. By the time he reached the 3rd address, the light had shifted and the harbor gulls had turned noisier over the market roofs. This one belonged to a young man named Owen Pike, a name starred twice on Constance's list. The room he rented sat above a net mender's shop and smelled of engine oil, chalk dust, and strong tea. Blueprints were pinned to one wall, real ones, hand-drawn, precise. Owen opened the door with a grease mark on his wrist and suspicion already ready in his face. But when Silas mentioned the old Relief Society, the suspicion broke into astonishment. "She remembered?" he asked. Silas looked past him at the drawings and said, "That depends what these are." Owen followed his glance, and something like pride lit his tired face. "Stormproof cottages," he said. "Affordable ones, for harbor families." Then he looked back at Silas, eyes suddenly bright in a way Silas had not expected. "Wait, who exactly sent you?" Silas stayed in the doorway a moment longer, taking in the room before he answered. Owen Pike's place was barely bigger than the marrow pantry, but every inch of it had been claimed by work. Rolled plans sat in a cracked umbrella stand. A ruler, 2 sharpened pencils, and a mug stained brown by old tea rested on a crate that served as a table. The air smelled of damp wool, machine grease, and chalk dust. On the wall, pinned under brass tacks, were neat drawings of narrow houses with steep roofs and raised foundations. Harbor houses, but smarter, stronger, built for wind. "Constance Marrow," Silas said at last. "She asked me to find out how you were doing." Owen looked at him like a man listening for a joke in bad taste. "Now?" "Yes." He let out a breath and rubbed the back of his neck. "Well, that's one way to reopen an old story." Then he stepped aside. "Come in before the whole staircase freezes over." Inside, the floorboards creaked under Silas's boots. Owen shut the door against the draft and leaned back against it for a second, still studying him. He was younger than Silas had expected, perhaps mid-20s, wiry rather than broad, with the restless look of someone used to splitting himself in two between work and thought. "You said she sent you," Owen said. "Why you?" "I work for her now." That explains nothing. Silas almost smiled. Fair enough. Owen gestured to the crate table and stayed standing. Then let's not waste time. I owe that woman more than I can repay, and I spent a year angry enough to say otherwise. He tapped one of the pinned plans. She covered my fees when I nearly lost my place in engineering school. Said harbor boys should be allowed to build more than nets and coffins if they had the head for it. His voice roughened slightly. Then the help stopped. I finished anyway. Nights in a freezing warehouse, classes by day, sleep when I could steal it. Silas looked at the drawings again. And these? Owen's face changed. The bitterness thinned. Pride came through. A housing designed for fishing families. Small footprint, strong framing, raised enough to survive flooded streets. Cheaper materials, but not cheap work. He pulled one sheet from the wall and spread it over the crate. See here? Ventilation under the floor. Roof angle for wind shear. Storage built into the wall so small rooms don't choke people. Silas bent over the page. He had no engineer's schooling, but years on the docks taught a man to recognize careful thinking. You drew all this yourself? After she helped me start, Owen gave a short laugh. Funny thing, isn't it? A woman with money decided harbor kids were worth educating, and now I spend half my spare hours sketching better houses for people who still patch their roofs with tar and prayer. That line sat with Silas. If she asked after me, Owen went on, quieted now, tell her I finished. Tell her I cursed her for disappearing and thanked her in the same breath for the reason I didn't quit. He glanced toward the plans. And tell her these are hers too, in a way. Silas nodded, committing every word to memory. He also noted the hunger under Owen's pride, not for pity, not for alms, but for one person with means to see value in what he had built. When he left the upper room, the day had turned raw and windy. He had time for one more address before he needed to get back up the hill, and he chose the house nearest the school lane. The name on the list was Ruth Vale, underlined twice, with a note in Constance's hand, 1 term short of certificate. Ruth answered the door with a toddler on one hip and chalk dust on her sleeve. She was younger than Della, older than Mara, and had the worn, alert expression of someone who kept too many small things from falling apart at once. The house behind her was crowded but clean. 2 little coats hung from nails by the stove. A slate board leaned beside the chair with children's letters half rubbed off. When he spoke Constance's name, Ruth went very still. I don't know what she wants from me now, she said. Maybe the same thing I want, Silas replied. The truth. That answer got him inside. Ruth shifted the child to the other hip and spoke without decorating any of it. She had been 1 term from finishing her teaching certificate when the last promised payment failed to arrive. She tried to stay on. Couldn't. Took in children instead. First 2, then 4, now 6 on most weekdays in the front room because working mothers needed somewhere to leave them and she needed the coins. So, I suppose, she said, glancing at the slate board, I still became a teacher, just not the way I meant to. There was no self-pity in it. That made it worse. Would you finish the certificate if you could? Silas asked. Ruth looked at him as if he had opened a window in the wrong season. Do you know how cruel that question is? Yes. The toddler tucked its face into her neck. Ruth kissed the child's hair automatically, still holding Silas's gaze. Then yes, she said, I would finish. By the time he climbed back toward Marrow House, the list in his pocket felt nothing like it had that morning. It was no longer a page of names waiting to be checked off. It had become voices, rooms, faces, small humiliations turned into whole detours in people's lives. He could smell flour from Della's kitchen still caught in his coat. He could see Mara's hands pausing over the tins. He could hear Owen saying the designs were hers too, in a way. And through it all, one thought kept pressing harder. Constance had not just withheld money when she withdrew. She had interrupted futures. Nora met him at the side door before he could knock twice. Well, she asked, reading the answer in his face before he spoke. She's awake? Waiting. The bedroom had changed again in his absence. The dispatch box was still open on the side table. The watch still ticked. The unplugged telephone remained where Nora had left it, but it no longer ruled the room. Constance was propped up against pillows with a notebook on the blanket and a pencil laid beside it, as if she had decided not to waste the time between one truth and the next. Her eyes went straight to his face. "You saw 3 of them." "Yes." "And?" He did not sit at once. He stood near the foot of the bed and gave it to her plainly. Della Haynes, holding her house together through baking and grit, needing books and boots more than bread. Mara Ellison, 1 term away from nursing before the money stopped, ready to return tomorrow if she could. Owen Pike, finished with his engineering degree by sheer stubbornness, drawing safer homes for harbor families in a room above a net shop. Ruth Vale, not yet visited in Constance's mind, but in truth already half a teacher without the certificate to prove it. With each report, Constance's face shifted. Shame, yes, but also focus. The old kind, the kind Nora had described. She asked precise questions. What age were Della's boys now? Did Mara still have her school papers? Were Owen's plans structural or only conceptual? How many children came to Ruth's front room each day? She did not turn away from the answers when they hurt. She leaned toward them. At one point, Nora quietly passed her the pencil. Constance could not write well enough to use it yet, but her fingers pressed against the wood as if remembering the motion mattered. When Silas finished, the room fell silent for a moment. Then Constance said, almost to herself, "We can still catch some of this." Silas looked at her. "Some." She turned her head toward him, and for the first time since he had entered her life, there was no contempt in her expression at all. Only urgency. "Tomorrow," she said, voice steadier than he had yet heard it, "you will go back out. And this time I need you to find the one person on that list who might help me rebuild the whole thing." Silas set his cap on the chair by the door and looked at Constance for a long moment before he answered. "The one person," he said, "or the one kind of person." She was propped higher than usual, the blanket smooth over her legs, the dispatch box still open on the side table like a wound that had finally stopped pretending to be furniture. The watch ticked beside it. Nora had lit the lamp early because the evening had gone dim and wet, and the room smelled of tea leaves, wool, and rain pressing at the window panes. Constance's face was tired, but her eyes were alive in a way he had not seen before all this began. "The one person," she said. "Someone who learned how to build help instead of merely receive it." Nora, standing near the fire screen, frowned slightly. "Do you already know who you mean?" Constance's gaze shifted to the list still partly visible in Silas's coat pocket. "There was one name I marked twice and then never spoke aloud again." Her mouth tightened at the memory. "Lucas Fenn." Silas searched the list in his mind. Fenn, connected to one of the widow claims? Yes, his mother was one of the women from the suspended files. Constance looked toward the window because memory seemed easier to handle sideways. He was clever. Too clever to stay in the harbor without help, and too loyal to leave it without guilt. We paid his accounting course in installments for 2 years. Then I vanished. Nora gave a quiet sound. "I remember him, thin as a rail, always carrying too many papers." Constance almost smiled at that, and always asking whether he might someday help organize the society better than we did. Elias liked him because he asked practical questions. I liked him because he irritated Edwin. That line would have sounded dry and grand once. Now it sounded almost human in a new way, and Silas noticed it. "So you think he kept going?" he said. "I don't know." She looked back at him directly. "That is why you will go find out." The next morning, the sky over the harbor sat low and gray, the kind that turned gulls into scraps of torn paper against the clouds. Silas left Marrow House with the marked list and the details Constance remembered in fragments. Above the chandlery lane, near the old sailmaker's steps. Mother's name, June Finn. Lucas was meant to have finished a course in finance if the payments had held. Whether they had or not, nobody in that house knew. The route took him farther from the docks than the other visits had, past the fish market noise, past the cooper's yard and the chemist corner, up into the older commercial quarter where narrow offices sat over shops and clerks in tired collars hurried under umbrellas as if lateness were a moral failing. It did not smell like the harbor there. Fewer nets, less salt, more paper, soot, and stale coffee. He found the stairwell by the brass plaque half hanging beside the door. Fenn Advisory Services, Scholarship Placement, and Educational Accounts. The paint on the letters was chipped, but the name was there. Silas stood still for a beat, feeling that strange jolt that comes when a guest turns out not only right but larger than expected. Upstairs, the office was little more than 2 rooms with a frosted glass partition and shelves full of folders. Yet it was busy. A young woman in spectacles sorted forms behind the front desk. A middle-aged man in a worn suit was explaining fee deadlines to someone near the window. On the wall hung a corkboard covered in pinned notices, bursaries, apprenticeships, exam dates, grant renewals. The place hummed with effort. The woman looked up. "Can I help you?" "I'm looking for Lucas Fenn." Her eyes flicked over his boots, coat, hands. Not dismissive, only curious. "Do you have an appointment?" "No." She almost said something more formal, then seemed to think better of it. "Name?" "Silas Reyes." From the inner office, a voice answered before she could repeat it. "Let him in." Lucas Fenn rose from behind a desk buried in open files. He was older now than Constance had described, broader through the shoulders, hair beginning to thin at the temples, but the quick intelligence in him was obvious at once. He held himself like a man who had taught himself to move among systems that had never expected him. His tie was loosened, sleeves rolled, pen behind one ear. He looked first at Silas's face, then at his coat, and something in his expression sharpened. "You came from the harbor," Lucas said. "Yes." "And not for your own schooling, I'd guess." Silas stepped inside and shut the door behind him. "I came from Constance Marrow." For one suspended second, Lucas did not move at all. Then he slowly removed the pen from behind his ear and set it on the desk. "Alive?" "Yes." His jaw worked once. "I had convinced myself she must be dead, or ashamed enough to wish she were." He gestured to the chair opposite the desk. "Sit. If you've come from her, I don't think this will be a short conversation." Silas sat. The office smelled of paper dust, ink, and the kind of cheap radiator heat that never reaches the feet. Through the glass partition, he could hear the muffled turning of pages and the occasional ring of the outer telephone. Lucas stayed standing a moment longer, studying him much the way Constance had studied him that first day, though without the cruelty. "She helped my mother when my father died," Lucas said at last. "Then she paid my course fees after I nearly left school to work the boats." He gave a humorless half-smile. "Then the money stopped, and I learned more about loans than any boy should." "You finished anyway." "I did, with debt hanging around my neck like an anchor." He spread one hand to the office around them. "Then I built this. Small at first. Advice for students no one else had time for. Families who needed forms explained in plain speech. Sponsors who wanted to help but didn't know how to follow through." He looked toward the corkboard. "Now we place grants, manage stipends, and keep people from falling through cracks they never even knew had names." Silas took that in quietly. This was what Constance had been reaching toward without saying it outright. Not only a person she had once helped, a person who had turned help into a structure. "How many?" Silas asked. Lucas leaned back against the desk. "In the last 2 years? 230 placed into courses, apprenticeships, or certification tracks." He said it without boasting, just accounting. "Most of them finished on time. Not all. Life still intervenes. But enough do that the pattern holds." Silas thought of Mara, of Ruth, of boys losing school for work, and women measuring dignity against rent. And you'd talk to Constance again? Lucas's eyes settled on him with new intensity. That depends. Has she sent for absolution or for work? Silas remembered the unplugged telephone, the widow's letter, the first time Constance had said, "I need someone to go find out." Then he answered as plainly as he could. "She sent for the truth first," he said. "Now I think she's sending for both." Lucas was silent long enough that the radiator clicked twice. Then he crossed to a tall side cabinet, unlocked it, and pulled out a neat stack of files with colored tabs. "If Constance Marrow truly means to reopen what she buried," he said, "then before I come to that house, there is something she needs to see." He laid the top file on the desk and turned it toward Silas. On the front was a familiar name, June Fenn. Suspended widow support case. Reopened independently. Outcome documented. And beneath it, clipped to the cover, was a handwritten note in a younger hand. For when she is finally ready to know what her silence cost. Silas read the note twice before he trusted himself to look up. Lucas did not hurry him. He stood by the desk with one hand resting on the cabinet key, his face set in that hard, practical calm people learn when feeling too much would stop the work. Outside the inner office, papers still moved, chairs still scraped, and somebody at the front desk laughed softly at something that had nothing to do with grief or old debts. Life, indifferent as ever, kept going. "That was my handwriting," Lucas said at last. "I wrote it the year I stopped waiting for her to answer." Silas touched the edge of the file with one finger. What did her silence cost? Lucas let out a slow breath through his nose. More than money. Money is the easiest thing to count. He took the file back, opened it, and flipped through pages that had been tabbed and cross-marked with fierce care. "My mother kept us afloat by taking in mending and boarders. We survived. Barely. But by the time help came from anywhere else, I'd already taken a loan I couldn't afford, left school for 6 months, and learned the first real rule of poverty." He lifted his eyes. "Delay punishes the careful first." That landed cleanly. He went on, quieter now. "I was angry with Constance for years. Then I understood something uglier. She wasn't the only one who failed us. The whole system did. Forms built for people with time. Deadlines written by men who had never had to choose between a heating bill and exam fees. So I stopped waiting for the world to become decent on its own and built this instead." He glanced toward the frosted glass wall. 2 years. 230 placements, grants, apprenticeships, course renewals, emergency fee bridges, 87% finishing on schedule. He said the numbers without pride, but not without ownership. The rest? Some got sick. Some had family trouble. Some just ran out of road. We still know their names. Silas took that in. The room around them seemed to sharpen with it. This was no dream scribbled in grief. This was a working answer. "So she was right," he said. "You might help rebuild more than one case." Lucas gave a short nod. "If she truly means rebuild." He closed the file. "That's the part I haven't decided yet." Silas leaned back slightly in the chair. "What would make you decide?" "The truth in her mouth, not yours." Lucas came around the desk and sat opposite him, forearms on his knees now, as direct as any dockman despite the office around him. "Did she send apologies, promises, a checkbook?" "No." "What then?" "A list, her own handwriting. 15 people she thinks she may still be able to reach. She asked me to find out what became of them." He paused. "And before that, she told a dead phone what she should have said years ago." Lucas's face changed at that. Not softened exactly, opened by a fraction. "So she finally answered." "In a way." Silence held for a second between them. Then Lucas stood, crossed to the side shelf, and took down 3 more files. "All right, I'll come." He stacked them neatly. "But I'm not coming alone with sentiment and tea. I'm bringing records. What happened after her account froze? Which young people stayed in school, which didn't? Which widows found workarounds, which debts became patterns? He looked back at Silas. If she wants to do this properly, she has to see the whole board, not just the pieces that flatter her conscience. That sounds like something she might respect. It sounds like something she might hate first. Lucas gave that thin, dry smile again, which is often how respect begins. By the time Silas got back to Merrow House, evening had drawn a dark line across the harbor. Lamps glowed in lower windows, nets hung black against the fading sky. Nora met him in the hall with one look and said, "She's been listening for the gate. She'll hear what I found now." Nora took his damp coat and lowered her voice. "Since you left, she asked me to open the study." Silas stopped. "The study?" The housekeeper nodded. "First time in 2 years." That told him as much as any speech. The study smelled of closed books, cold fireplace ash, and old leather. Constance was not in there, not yet. She waited in her room, but the door between both spaces had been opened, and light from the desk lamp spilled across the threshold, as if the house itself had remembered a passage it had forgotten. When Silas stepped in, she looked up from the blanket where the folded list still rested. "Well?" He told her carefully, about Lucas's office above the old commercial lane, about the corkboard crowded with grant notices, about the staff, the records, the numbers. 230 placements in 2 years, 87% finishing on time. About June Fenn surviving through work and grit. About Lucas building a place that translated systems into plain speech for families like his own. At first, Constance only listened. Then, when he repeated the note clipped to June Fenn's file, she shut her eyes and took it like a blow. "For when she is finally ready to know what her silence cost," she repeated. "Yes." Nora moved as if to say something comforting, but Constance lifted a finger the little she could and stopped her. "No, let it stand." So it stood. After a while she asked, "And will he come?" He said yes, with records. That answer did something to her posture. Not a miracle, not health, something sterner. The old mental alignment he had begun to recognize when work entered the room. She turned her face toward the open study door. "Nora," she said, "clear the big desk." The housekeeper blinked. "Tonight?" "Tonight." "And the account books?" "Bring them too. All the ones from the relief years. Also the current estate ledgers if Edwin has not hidden them in some respectable drawer." Nora let out a breath that sounded half shocked, half relieved. "Yes, madam." Constance looked back at Silas. "Tomorrow morning, I want the harbor board letter, the suspended files, your notes from the visits, and the dispatch box arranged by category." "You'll tire yourself out." "Probably." Her eyes flicked once toward the study again. "I am beginning to suspect exhaustion and purpose feel different. If this story has stayed with you this long, you can hear it now, can't you? The sound of a woman who spent years punishing herself and has suddenly remembered that work can be a kind of prayer, too." For the next hour, Merrow House moved with a strange new energy. Nora aired the study. Silas carried ledgers from cabinets no one had touched in seasons. Constance dictated where things should go from memory, so exact it startled them both. Widow claims left shelf, youth education center drawer, unresolved harbor disputes top right pigeonholes. Her face paled from the effort, but she did not ask to stop. At one point, while Silas was laying out the old registers, he heard the faint scrape of fabric and turned. Constance was staring at her own right hand atop the blanket. "What is it?" he asked. Her voice came out almost disbelieving. "My finger." Silas stepped closer. The index finger of her right hand had moved. Only a fraction. A small curl, no more than that. But it had moved. Nora, standing with an armful of files, gasped softly, "Mrs. Merrow." Constance looked from her hand to Silas, startled, almost frightened by her own body. Did you see it? Yes. She stared at the finger as though it belonged to somebody else. Then, from somewhere beyond the front hall, the bell rang through the house. Not the side door, the main bell. One chime, then another. Nora's eyes widened. At this hour? Silas looked toward the corridor. Constance's breath caught once, and in a voice that sounded equal parts dread and readiness, she said, "Go see who has come before I decide whether this is mercy or trouble." Silas went down the front hall with the bell still echoing in the house. The main entrance was rarely used now. You could feel that in the colder air there, in the faint smell of wet stone and old polish, in the way the runner lay too perfectly straight. When he opened the door, rain-specked darkness pressed in from the porch lamps, and on the step stood Lucas Fenn, coat collar up, leather satchel in one hand, flat file case in the other. "I thought better of waiting until morning," Lucas said. Silas stepped aside at once. "She's awake." "Good." Lucas entered, bringing with him the smell of damp wool, city soot, and paper that had traveled in weather. His eyes moved quickly over the hall, high ceiling, carved banister, the kind of house built to reassure rich people they would never fall. "I've imagined this place often enough," he said quietly. Strange to finally be inside it. Nora appeared from the corridor before Silas could answer. She took one look at the visitor, at the cases in his hands, and understood more quickly than most people would have. "You must be Mr. Fenn," she said. "I am." "She's in the study." For a heartbeat, Lucas did not move. Whatever he had built in those offices above the lane, whatever numbers and files had made him useful to hundreds of young people, there was still a boy in him returning to the source of an old wound. Then he gave a short nod and followed Silas. Constance was not in the study itself yet, but the doors between her room and that reopened world stood wide. Ledgers had been set out. The desk lamp burned low and warm over rows of papers. The dispatch box sat open beside the watch. When Lucas entered the threshold, Constance lifted her eyes to him and did not look away. Neither spoke first. Lucas set the leather satchel on the cleared desk with deliberate care. "You look different," he said at last. Constance answered with equal plainness. "So do you." That might have become something bitter in other years. Tonight, it did not. It only acknowledged time. Nora moved toward Constance's chair handles. "Shall I bring you through?" "Yes," she said. The transfer into the study took a minute and more dignity than grace. But when Nora settled her behind the desk that had been closed for so long, something in the room seemed to lock into place. She still looked fragile, her fingers still barely obeyed her. Yet with the ledgers before her and Lucas across from her, she no longer looked like a woman being managed. She looked like someone arriving late to her own work. Lucas did not offer easy mercy. He opened the file case and laid out documents in careful rows. June Fenn's old support file, suspension notices, loan records, scholarship placements, a typed summary sheet from his own office. He spoke without ornament. "My mother survived because she took in boarders and because neighbors helped when forms failed. I survived because I borrowed at rates no student should accept and because one lecturer looked the other way on deadlines." He tapped the older documents once. "Your silence did damage, real damage. But it was not the only damage. The system itself is built to exhaust people before it assists them." Constance listened with both hands resting on the blanket, one finger on the right hand still slightly curled from the effort earlier. "I believe you." Lucas studied her. "Do you? Or are you only too tired to argue?" "I am tired," she said, "but not of that." That answer landed. Silas saw it in the way Lucas's shoulders eased by half an inch. Not trust. Not yet. Just the beginning of a different kind of conversation. If you're still with me here, you can hear what matters now. No one is asking to be seen as innocent anymore. They're asking what can still be done with the truth. Lucas laid down one final sheet. "Then here are my conditions." Nora sucked in a breath so quietly only Silas noticed. No donations handed out from impulse. No respectable speeches followed by private retreat. No Edwin anywhere near the accounting chain. Independent review for every urgent case. Written tracking. Field verification done by someone people will actually speak honestly to. His eyes cut briefly towards Silas. And if you reopen aid, it does not stop at widow's rent. It includes apprenticeships, school return funding, and practical support that keeps families from sliding backward while everybody congratulates themselves for caring. Constance took all of it without flinching. Agreed. Lucas blinked. He had expected resistance. She went on, voice gaining quiet force as she spoke. I also want the suspended widow claims reopened first. Della Haynes. June Fenn's file reviewed in full for the record. Mara Ellison back into nursing if she still wants it. Ruth Vale to finish her teaching certificate. Owen Pike's plans assessed properly, not admired and forgotten. Her eyes sharpened in the lamplight. And I want you to tell me where I am underthinking this. For the first time, Lucas almost smiled. That, he said, sounds more like the woman my mother used to describe. The line hit her, but she did not shrink from it. Then perhaps she will not be disappointed forever. Rain ticked lightly at the study windows. Somewhere deeper in the house, the old clock struck the hour. No one seemed to notice. They were already in the work. Silas stood near the bookcase while Lucas and Constance bent over the first list together. Names, amounts. What could be solved quickly? What would require visits? Who needed money? Who needed structure? Nora fetched tea and, at Constance's direction, paper tabs for sorting the active files from the dead ones. Once, when Lucas questioned an old notation on a coal grant, Constance corrected him from memory with the name of the grocer who had handled delivery. He looked up sharply at that, and something like respect finally showed its face. Then Lucas placed both palms flat on the desk and said, "There's one more thing." Constance's gaze lifted. "If you mean to do this properly, hiding in this house is over." His voice stayed calm, but there was no softness in it. "People might accept money from an account. They may even accept help through me or through him." He nodded toward Silas. "But if you want the harbor to believe this is real, you will have to face them yourself." The room went still. Nora turned slowly toward Constance. Silas said nothing at all. And after a long, long pause, Constance looked toward the dark window where her own reflection hovered over the night and asked the question none of them could answer for her. When? The question stayed in the study long after Constance asked it. When? That alone told Silas how far she had come. Rain still tapped the tall windows. The desk lamp threw a pool of amber light across ledgers, clipped notes, and Lucas's open files. Nora had gone to fetch fresh tea, though no one had touched the last cups. The watch on the side table kept up its quiet, stubborn ticking, and in that sound there was something almost strange now, not accusation, not exactly. Time moving forward whether any of them had been ready or not. Lucas answered first. Soon. Constance did not seem surprised by the bluntness. That is not a date. No, he said. It's a warning. Silas stayed near the bookcase, listening. He had begun in that house as the rough-handed man expected to fail by supper. Now he was standing inside a room that had once been sealed by grief, watching an old benefactor, a harbor-born advisor, and a weary housekeeper measure the distance between shame and action. Lucas drew one of the active files toward him. If you wait until you feel clean enough, brave enough, forgiven enough, you won't go. Public work rarely begins at a noble moment. It begins when delay gets more expensive than fear. Constance's eyes narrowed, though not in anger, in thought. You speak as if you've done this before. I have, Lucas said, with parents who thought coming to our office meant admitting failure. With students who were certain one missed payment proved they didn't belong in school at all. You don't wait for courage. You make the appointment first. That line sat with her. Nora returned with the tray and set it down quietly. Who would need to be there? She asked. Lucas answered almost at once. The Harbor Board representative, Della Haynes, if she'll come. Mara, Ruth, and Owen, if they're willing. A few others from the urgent list. No speeches from Edwin, no ornamental donors, only people with a stake in whether this is real. Constance's gaze moved to Silas. "And you?" He gave a small shrug. "If I'm needed." Lucas looked at him sideways. "You're needed." Nora almost smiled at that. Constance let out a slow breath and looked toward the window, where her reflection hovered faintly over the dark glass. "If I sit before them," she said, "I will not look like the woman they remember." "No," Lucas said. "You will look like the woman who chose to come anyway." That was harder for her to hear than praise would have been. Silas saw it in the slight tightening near her mouth, in the way one shoulder shifted against the blanket. She was still learning how to stand inside honesty without armoring herself at once. After a while, she said, "Then it should not be in a board office." "Agreed," Lucas replied. "Nor in this house." Silas understood that too. The Marrow House carried too much weight, too much distance, too much history arranged in polished wood and shut doors. "The old Sailors' Chapel Hall," Nora said softly, surprising them all. "It's neutral ground. Families use it for suppers, memorials, aid meetings. People know the room. It doesn't frighten them." Lucas nodded immediately. That could work. Constance turned to Nora. "Can it be booked?" "For a weekday evening, yes, especially if Reverend Hale hears it's for practical relief and not vanity." "Then ask for it." Nora's hands trembled just a little as she reached for the notepad on the desk. It was such a small instruction, and yet the room seemed to feel it. The first outward move. Not files, not remorse. A public place, a date to be chosen. Work no longer confined to paper. If this story has made it this far with you, then you can hear the difference too. This is what it sounds like when private sorrow stops circling itself and starts making room for other lives again. Lucas opened his satchel once more and removed a thinner folder. "There's another matter," he said. Constance looked up. "Your estate structure." He placed a type sheet on the desk. If aid is to restart cleanly, the dormant relief funds can't just be thawed and handed around. Edwin was wrong in spirit, but not wrong that the old mechanism is unstable. We need a revised trust, independent oversight, and field reporting that people will actually believe. Constance listened without flinching. "Can you draft it?" "Yes, but I'll need access to the current books, and that means one of two things. Either Edwin cooperates, he let that possibility die on its own, or you instruct him in writing and copy the harbor board." Nora gave a dry sound that might once have been a laugh. "I'd pay to see his face." Constance almost did smile then. Almost. "You may get the chance." Silas glanced at her right hand where it rested on the blanket, remembering the tiny movement from earlier. "You're tired." "I am." "Then enough for tonight." She looked as if she meant to argue, and then seemed to decide the argument would cost more than agreement. "Very well." She turned back to Lucas. "Come tomorrow afternoon. Bring the documents that matter most." "I know the difference," he said. "And Lucas," he paused at the satchel clasp. "When we meet at the hall, if anyone asks whether I disappeared because I did not care," he waited. "Answer them honestly." Lucas studied her for a long second. "I intend to." Nora helped prepare Constance for bed after that, while Silas and Lucas carried the most urgent files into the adjoining room and stacked them in the order they would need tomorrow. Widow claims first, education gaps second, outstanding appeals third. Owen's drawings on top of the pile by themselves, because Constance had asked to see them again in daylight. The study no longer felt like a sealed museum. It felt used, disturbed, awake. At the front door, Lucas stopped before leaving and said quietly to Silas, "I judged her for years. I may still." He buttoned his coat against the rain. "But I didn't expect her to call for the truth before the money." Silas leaned on the banister post, tired in his bones and clearer in his mind than he had been in a long time. "Neither did I." Lucas gave a brief nod and stepped out into the wet night. By the time Silas came back upstairs, Nora had settled Constance and lowered the lamps. The room was dim except for the single light on the writing desk and the reflection of rain in the window. Constance looked worn through, but wakeful. "Did he go?" she asked. "Yes." "And will he return?" "Yes." She turned her eyes toward the dark doorway into the study. "And tomorrow becomes real." "It already is." That answer did not soothe her, it steadied her. For a while, neither spoke. Then, just as Silas reached to lower the lamp another inch, Constance said, "There is one more thing I have not told you." He looked at her. Her voice had gone low again, not with shame this time, but with the kind of caution people use before stepping onto ice they are not sure will hold. "Edwin does not only control the ledgers," she said. "There is a signed transfer draft somewhere in this house. One prepared after my husband died, when I was not fully attending to anything. If he files it before I act, he can lock the old fund structures under his office for months." Her eyes sharpened despite the fatigue. "And if that happens, the meeting at the chapel becomes nothing but apology with no power behind it." Silas stood very still. "Do you know where it is?" he asked. Constance closed her eyes for one brief moment, then opened them again. "I know who would hide it," she said. "And I know the last room in this house I swore I would never enter again." The last room turned out to be the old wireless office above the front hall. Nora had not opened it since the week Elias died. The key still hung on a hook inside the linen press, wrapped in yellowing paper as if hiding metal could hide memory. Constance insisted on going there herself. Not tomorrow. That same night, while rain still traced the windows and the house held its breath around her decision, it took all three of them to manage it. Nora fetched the transfer chair. Silas checked every strap twice. Lucas, still in his damp coat, said nothing unless something practical needed saying. When they wheeled her into the narrow upper corridor, the air changed. Less polish, more dust, old varnish, closed wood. The kind of stillness that settles in rooms people stop entering, because they cannot survive what the room remembers. The wireless office door resisted when Silas pushed it. The swollen frame gave with a groan. Inside, the space was smaller than any of them expected. A desk under a window, shelves of tied books, a dead-wall telephone. A brass lamp greened faintly at the seams. And on the far side, a steel document cabinet with one drawer not fully shut. Constance looked at it once and said, "There." Silas crossed the room. Dust rose under his boots. The cabinet drawer stuck, then slid with a dry scrape. Inside were wrapped deeds, account maps, correspondence tied with legal tape, and one cream folder marked "Draft Transfer of Dormant Maritime Funds." Edwin's name sat at the bottom, beside an unsigned witness line. Lucas took the folder, scanned the first page, and let out a slow breath. If this had been filed, he could have frozen everything under review for months. He looked back at Constance. "He was preparing to move before you did." Constance did not even blink. "Burn it." "No," Lucas said at once. "Copy it, log it, and keep the original as evidence. Then issue your own instruction first." He folded the file shut. "We win cleanly, or we don't win at all." So that was how the night ended, with signatures. Nora brought ink. Lucas drafted a formal suspension of any private transfer pending direct review by Constance Marrow and an independent advisor. Silas witnessed. Before midnight, a messenger from the harbor board had been woken out of bed and paid to carry sealed copies before sunrise. Edwin woke the next morning to find himself outrun. 2 days later, the sailors' chapel hall filled before the lamps were fully lit. Widows came in dark coats, still smelling of rain and smoke. Young people came carrying folders, loan papers, course forms, and guarded hope. Della Haynes stood in the back at first, arms crossed. Mara arrived straight from the chemist shop, apron folded in a bag. Ruth came with chalk still ghosting one cuff. Owen carried one of his rolled housing plans under his arm without realizing he had brought it. Lucas stood near the front table with his files in order. Silas moved between benches, steadying chairs, speaking quietly, making sure no one got turned away by confusion at the door. Then Nora wheeled Constance in. The room changed on sight. Not because she looked grand, she didn't. She looked pale, tired, and more human than the rumors had ever allowed. The hall fell silent anyway. Some people stared. One or two did not bother hiding the hurt in their faces. Della Haynes did not sit down. Constance asked to be placed facing them, not behind the table. When Nora settled the chair and stepped back, there was no desk, no blanket of paperwork, no polished distance to shield her. Only wood floorboards, chapel light, and the people her silence had touched. She began without flourish. "I should have come sooner," she said. "Years sooner. Some of you waited for letters that never came. Some of you changed the course of your lives because I shut a door and left it shut. I cannot call those years back." Her voice trembled once and steadied. "I am not here to ask you to call me good. I am here to say the account opens again under new hands and clear books, and if you are willing, the work starts tonight." No one applauded. This was not that kind of room. Della Haynes spoke first from the back. "Words are cheap." "Yes," Constance answered. "That is why Lucas Fenn has the files, and why Silas Reyes has the field reports, and why the first widow claims are cleared for issue as of this afternoon." Lucas rose, held up the stamped board copies, and began reading the approved actions one by one. Della's boys' school costs and winter boots. Mara's reinstatement bridge and term fees. Ruth's final teaching certificate payment and childcare support while she completed it. June Fenn's unresolved file formally corrected in the record. 2 immediate rent stabilizations. 3 insurance appeals reopened. Owen's design review scheduled with an engineer willing to work at cost for harbor families. You could feel the room shifting as he read. Not softening all at once, recalibrating. Hurt did not vanish, but certainty that nothing would change began to loosen. Then Owen stepped forward with the rolled plans in his hands. "If this is truly beginning again," he said, looking first at Constance and then at the room, "I want these assessed for widow housing along the upper quay lots. Strong houses, affordable ones, not patched boxes." Constance looked at the plans, then at him. "Bring them here." Silas took the roll from Owen and laid it across the table. Constance could not fully spread the paper herself, but her right hand, slow, trembling, stubborn, managed enough movement to pin one corner while Lucas opened the rest. It was a tiny motion, barely there. Yet everyone near the front saw it. Nora covered her mouth. Silas looked at that hand and felt something in his chest go quiet and full at the same time. The hall did not erupt. It did something better. It leaned in. By the end of the evening, people were not leaving with promises alone. They left with dates, names, copies, routes, follow-up times, and Lucas's office address. Della Haynes stopped at the doorway on her way out, turned back once, and gave Constance a single short nod. Not forgiveness, permission to keep going. Mara cried only after she had her reinstatement paper in hand. Ruth stood very still over her certificate forms, as if afraid blinking would make them disappear. Owen remained by the table, arguing roof pitch with Lucas, and, for the first time in years, Constance argued back. That was how the harbor accepted her again. Not in one sweeping act, but through ledgers opened, boots paid for, forms signed, and a widow in a chapel hall keeping one trembling finger on the corner of a young man's plan so the paper would not curl shut. Later that night, after the last chair had been stacked and the rain had finally thinned to mist, Silas wheeled her out onto the chapel porch. The tide was turning below the hill. In the dark, whoring ropes lifted and settled with the water, no longer pulled tight enough to groan. Constance looked down toward the harbor lights and said, very quietly, "He would have hated those roof lines and approved them anyway." Silas smiled. "Sounds like he had good judgment." "So do you," she said. On the ride back up, she did not ask him whether he would stay. She simply said, "Tomorrow morning there will be too much work for one steward." And that was answer enough. By the time the house slept, the old study door stood open. The dispatch box was half empty, and the watch beside the lamp had wound its way into another hour without anyone trying to stop it. If this story stayed with you, leave a word for the moment that hit you hardest. And if you want more long stories like this, stay close to the channel.